Greetings, brave warriors and shield maidens. If you seek the strength and wisdom of the ancient Vikings, you've come to the right place. Don't waste time. Subscribe to the channel now and join our horde to strengthen this community of true Vikings. As you can see, our channel is new, so your subscription is crucial to our growth. If you're a true fan of the Vikings, show your support. Let the power of the Viking axe guide your hand to click the like button, and in the comments, tell us which city you're watching from so we know where in the world our stories are reaching, all because the longship's dragon-headed prow cut through the mist-shrouded waters of the North Sea. Bjorn Ragnarsson stood at the bow, his keen eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of land. The salt-laden air whipped through his braided hair, carrying with it the promise of glory and riches. "Land ho!" The cry came from the crow's nest, sending a ripple of excitement through the crew. Bjorn's hand instinctively tightened on the hilt of his sword, Blood Drinker. "Ready yourselves, men!" Bjorn's voice boomed across the deck. "The coast of Northumbria awaits, ripe for the taking." A chorus of cheers and the clashing of weapons against shields answered him. These were his men, hardened warriors who had followed him on countless raids. They trusted him with their lives, and he would lead them to victory once more. As the shoreline emerged from the mist, Bjorn's heart raced with anticipation. The monastery of Lindisfarne stood silhouetted against the pale morning sky, its stone walls a pitiful defense against the fury of the Northmen. "Oars out," Bjorn commanded. "Let's show these Christian sheep the might of Thor." The longship surged forward, its oars churning the water into a frothy wake. Bjorn could already taste the sweetness of victory on his tongue. Little did he know that fate had other plans for him this day. The beach erupted into chaos as the Vikings poured from their ships. Bjorn led the charge, Blood Drinker singing its deadly song as it cleaved through the air. The few Saxon defenders on the beach were no match for the battle-hardened Norsemen. "To the monastery!" Bjorn roared, pointing with his bloodied sword. "Let no one stand in our way." As they stormed up the hill towards the stone buildings, bells began to toll frantically. Monks in brown robes scattered like frightened rabbits, some clutching precious manuscripts to their chests. Bjorn kicked down the door of the main hall, wood splintering under his boot. Inside, a group of monks huddled around something, their backs to the entrance. "Step aside, and you may yet live to see another dawn," Bjorn growled, advancing into the room. One of the monks turned, revealing not fear, but fierce determination in his eyes. In his hands, he clutched an ornate cross of gold and precious gems. "You'll not take this, heathen," the monk spat. "God protects his own." Bjorn laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the stone walls. "Your God is far from here, old man. Now give me that trinket and I might let you keep your hands." The monk's response was swift and unexpected. He swung the heavy cross like a mace, catching Bjorn off guard. The Viking warrior stumbled back, more surprised than hurt. "You dare?" Bjorn snarled, his vision turning red with rage. He lunged forward, Blood Drinker flashing in the dim light. But the monk was quicker than he looked. He ducked under Bjorn's swing and thrust the pointed base of the cross upward with all his might. Pain exploded in Bjorn's face as the cross connected with his left eye. He roared in agony, staggering backward. Blood poured down his cheek and the world tilted sickeningly. Bjorn, one of his men, Ulf, rushed to his side. "By the gods, your eye." Through the haze of pain, Bjorn could see the monk backing away, horror written across his face. The cross, now stained with blood, clattered to the floor. "Kill them all," Bjorn growled, his voice thick with pain and fury. He pressed a hand to his ruined eye, feeling warm blood seep between his fingers. The room erupted into violence once more. Bjorn leaned heavily against a pillar, his good eye struggling to focus. The sounds of screams and clashing metal filled the air, but they seemed distant, muffled. "Bjorn, we need to get you back to the ship," Ulf said, his voice cutting through the fog. "That eye needs tending." Bjorn nodded numbly, allowing his friend to lead him out of the monastery. The raid continued around them, but Bjorn was oblivious to it all. His world had narrowed to a pinpoint of agony centered on his face. The journey back to Norway was a blur of pain and fever. Bjorn drifted in and out of consciousness, plagued by nightmares of darkness closing in around him. When he finally came to his senses, he found himself in his own bed, the familiar sense of home surrounding him. "He wakes," a gruff voice said. Bjorn turned his head to see his father, Ragnar the Red, sitting by his bedside. The old warrior's face was etched with concern. "Father," Bjorn croaked, his throat dry. "How long?" 2 weeks, Ragnar replied, offering a cup of water. "We feared we'd lost you to fever." Bjorn drank greedily, then reached up to touch his face. Thick bandages covered his left eye. "Your eye," Ragnar began, then trailed off. "Tell me," Bjorn demanded. His father sighed heavily. "The healers did what they could, but the damage was too great. You'll not see from that eye again." The words hit Bjorn like a physical blow. He lay back, staring at the ceiling with his remaining eye. A warrior with one eye was a liability, a burden. He might as well be dead. "Leave me," he whispered. "Son." "Leave," Bjorn roared, turning away from his father. He heard Ragnar's heavy footsteps retreat, followed by the soft closing of the door. Only then did Bjorn allow the tears to come, hot and bitter, soaking into his bandages. Days passed, blending into weeks. Bjorn refused all visitors, even as he heard the whispers outside his door. The great Bjorn Ragnarsson, felled by a monk's cross. How the mighty had fallen. One night, as the full moon hung low in the sky, Bjorn made his decision. He rose from his bed, donning his armor with practiced ease despite his impaired depth perception. Blooddrinker hung at his side, a familiar weight that brought him no comfort. He slipped out of the longhouse, making his way down to the fjord. The night was clear and cold, stars twinkling overhead like the jewels he'd never raid again. Bjorn stood at the water's edge, looking out over the dark expanse. "So, this is how it ends," he murmured, drawing Blooddrinker from its sheath. The blade gleamed in the moonlight, as thirsty as ever. "One last taste, old friend." He raised the sword, preparing to fall upon it. "Better a warrior's death than a life of shame and pity." "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Bjorn Ragnarsson." The voice, soft yet commanding, startled him. Bjorn whirled around, nearly losing his balance. A figure stood in the shadows of a nearby pine, cloaked and hooded. "Who goes there?" Bjorn demanded, brandishing his sword. "Show yourself." The figure stepped forward, pushing back the hood to reveal a woman's face. She was neither young nor old, her eyes a startling shade of gray that seemed to shimmer in the moonlight. "I am Ylva," she said, her voice carrying an otherworldly quality. "Some call me the Whisperer, and I have come to offer you a choice, Bjorn One Eye." Bjorn lowered his sword, curiosity overcoming his initial wariness. "What choice could you possibly offer me, witch? I am half a man, useless in battle." Ylva smiled, a mysterious curve of her lips. "What if I told you that your greatest strength lies not in what you can see, but in what you cannot?" "Speak plainly," Bjorn growled, his patience wearing thin. "The god Heimdall sees all, hears all," Ylva said, taking a step closer. His gaze pierces the veils between worlds. "What if you could share in that sight, Bjorn? What if your blindness could become your greatest gift?" Bjorn's heart raced at her words. "How?" he whispered, hardly daring to hope. Ylva reached out, her fingers brushing the bandages over his ruined eye. "There is a ritual," she said softly. "Ancient magic, older than the gods themselves. It will not restore your physical sight, but it will grant you visions beyond mortal ken. You will see what is, what was, and what may yet be." Bjorn's mind reeled at the possibilities. To be useful again, to lead his people, but at what cost? "What's the price?" he asked, for surely such power did not come freely. Ylva's gray eyes seemed to look through him, into his very soul. "The price is purpose," she said. "You will be bound to the fate of your people, Bjorn Ragnarsson. Your visions will guide them through the storms to come. Are you prepared for such a burden?" Bjorn looked down at Blooddrinker, still clutched in his hand. Then he gazed out over the fjord, where the first light of dawn was beginning to paint the sky. In that moment he saw two paths stretching before him, one ending here in the cold waters of the fjord, and another leading into an uncertain but vital future. He turned back to Ylva, squaring his shoulders. "I am ready," he said, his voice firm with newfound resolve. "Show me this ritual, Ylva the Whisperer. Let me become the eyes of my people." Ylva nodded, a look of approval crossing her face. "Then come," she said, turning towards the forest. "We have much to do before the sun rises." As Bjorn followed her into the shadows of the pines, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. His journey was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. Whatever trials lay ahead, he would face them not as Bjorn the Blinded, but as Bjorn Heimdallsson, the seer of the north. The fate of his people now rested in his hands, and in the visions that would soon fill his mind. The thought both terrified and exhilarated him. As the trees closed in around them, Bjorn sent a silent prayer to the gods, not for protection, but for the strength to bear the burden that was to come. For in the darkness of his blindness, Bjorn had found a new purpose, and with it, a chance to become something far greater than he had ever been before. The longship's hull groaned as it cut through the choppy waters of the fjord. At the stern, Astrid Ironheart stood tall, her golden hair whipping in the wind. Her steel-gray eyes were fixed on the distant shoreline, where smoke rose from a cluster of buildings, the hall of Jarl Eirik the Red. "Steady now," Astrid called to her crew. "Remember, we're here to negotiate first. The axes come out only if words fail." A low chuckle rippled through the warriors. They knew their leader's negotiations often ended in bloodshed, but none would dare question her methods. Astrid had earned their loyalty through courage and cunning, leading them to victory after victory. As they neared the shore, Astrid's second-in-command, Torsten, approached her. "The men are restless, Astrid. They say Eirik will never agree to your terms." Astrid's lips curled into a wolfish grin. "Then we'll give him a choice he can't refuse." The longship ground to a halt on the pebbly beach. Astrid leapt over the side, landing with cat-like grace. Her armor clinked softly, a blend of mail and leather, adorned with runes of protection. At her hip hung Soul Reaver, the axe that had claimed countless lives. "Jarl Eirik," Astrid's voice boomed across the beach. "Come out and face me, you old goat, or are you too busy hiding behind your thralls?" For a moment silence reigned. Then the great doors of the hall burst open, and out strode Eirik the Red, flanked by his housecarls. The Jarl was a bear of a man, his beard streaked with gray and his belly straining against his mail shirt. "Astrid Ironheart," Eirik growled, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword. "You've got some nerve showing your face here after what you did to my son." Astrid laughed, a sound as sharp as the blade of an axe. "Your son got what he deserved, Eirik. I warned him not to raid my lands. It's not my fault he was too stupid to listen." Eric's face flushed red with anger. "State your business and be gone, Shield Maiden, before I decide to mount your head on my gate." "My business is simple," Astrid replied, taking a step forward. Her warriors tensed, ready for action. "Your clan has grown weak, Eirik. Your raids bring in less plunder each year and your people suffer for it. I'm here to offer you a chance to join my banner. Together we could rule all of Norway." A chorus of jeers erupted from Eirik's men. The old Jarl spat on the ground. "I'd sooner kiss a troll's arse than bend the knee to you, girl." Astrid's eyes narrowed. "Then you leave me no choice, old man. I challenge you to Holmgang. Here and now, before gods and men, the winner takes all." A hush fell over the assembled warriors. Holmgang was sacred, a duel that could not be refused without losing all honor. Eric's face paled, but he knew he was trapped. "Very well," he growled, drawing his sword. "Let's see if you fight as well as you talk, Ironheart." Astrid unsheathed Soul Reaver, its edge glinting in the pale sunlight. "Oh, I do much better, Eirik, I do much better." The two leaders circled each other on the beach, their followers forming a ring around them. Eric struck first, his sword whistling through the air. Astrid ducked under the blow, feeling the wind of its passage ruffle her hair. She retaliated with a lightning-fast series of strikes, her axe a blur of motion. Eric managed to parry most, but one caught him on the shoulder, drawing first blood. "You've slowed, old man," Astrid taunted, dancing out of reach. "Too many winters by the fire, eh?" Eric roared in fury, charging forward with his sword raised high. It was the opening Astrid had been waiting for. She sidestepped at the last moment, bringing Soul Reaver around in a vicious arc. The axe bit deep into Eric's side, finding the gap between his mail links. The Jarl stumbled, his sword falling from nerveless fingers. Astrid stood over him, Soul Reaver dripping red. "Yield, Eric, yield and live." But there was no yield in the old Jarl's eyes, only hatred and desperation. With a final surge of strength, he lunged for Astrid's legs. Soul Reaver fell once more, and Eric the Red moved no more. Silence reigned on the beach. Astrid turned to face Eric's shocked followers, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "The old way is done." Eric fell to his own stubbornness and pride. "I offer you a new path, one of strength and prosperity. Join me, and together we'll make our names echo through the halls of Valhalla." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then slowly, one of Eric's housecarls stepped forward. He was young, with fire in his eyes and ambition written across his face. "I am Halfdan, son of Eric," he declared. "And I say we listen to what Astrid Ironheart has to offer." A murmur ran through the crowd. Astrid smiled, extending her hand to Halfdan. "A wise choice, young wolf. Your father's stubbornness did not pass to you." As Halfdan clasped her arm, a cheer went up from both sides. The battle was won without further bloodshed, exactly as Astrid had planned. In the days that followed, Astrid moved swiftly to consolidate her power. She called a thing, a gathering of all free men, to formally recognize her as the new Jarl. The great hall buzzed with excitement and tension. Warriors from both clans mingled uneasily, hands never straying far from their weapons. Astrid sat in the high seat, Soul Reaver across her lap, her eyes scanning the crowd. Torsten approached, his voice low. "There's dissent among some of the older warriors, Astrid. They say a woman has no right to be Jarl." Astrid's lip curled in a snarl. "Then let them challenge me. I'll show them what this woman can do." As if on cue, a grizzled warrior stepped forward from the crowd. His beard was shot through with gray and scars crisscrossed his arms. "I am Gunnar Bearslayer," he growled, "and I say Astrid Ironheart has no right to sit in that chair. Being clever with an axe doesn't make you fit to lead." A hush fell over the hall. All eyes turned to Astrid, waiting to see how she would respond to this challenge. Slowly, deliberately, Astrid rose from the high seat. She descended the steps, Soul Reaver in hand, until she stood face to face with Gunnar. "You think I'm not fit to lead, old man?" Her voice was soft, but it carried to every corner of the hall. "Let me tell you what makes a leader. It's not just skill with a weapon, though I have that in plenty. It's vision. It's the ability to see beyond the next raid, the next winter." She began to pace, her eyes never leaving Gunnar's. "I see a future where our people don't just survive, but thrive. Where we're not just feared, but respected. Where our children grow up strong and our elders die with honor, not hunger." Astrid's voice rose, filled with passion and conviction. "I've sailed further than any of you. I've seen the riches of the southern lands, the weakness of their kings. We have the strength to take it all, but only if we stand united." She whirled to face the entire hall now, her arms spread wide. "Join me, and I swear by all the gods I will lead us to glory beyond your wildest dreams. Our names will be remembered in sagas for 1,000 years." The hall erupted in cheers. Warriors pounded their shields, caught up in Astrid's vision. Even Gunnar looked shaken, the challenge dying on his lips. Astrid turned back to him, her voice low once more. "So, Gunnar Bearslayer, do you still think me unfit to lead?" The old warrior hesitated for a moment, then slowly sank to one knee. "No, Jarl Astrid. I was wrong. Lead us, and we will follow." A triumphant smile spread across Astrid's face. She raised Soul Reaver high, her voice ringing out over the cheering crowd. "Then let it be known. From this day forward we are one people, under one banner, the banner of Astrid Ironheart." The roar that followed shook the very timbers of the hall. Astrid returned to the high seat, her heart pounding with exhilaration. She had done it. She had united the clans under her rule. But as the celebration raged around her, Astrid's mind was already racing ahead. This was just the beginning. There were more clans to unite, more lands to conquer. And beyond that, her eyes drifted to the great map carved into the wall of the hall. It showed Norway, yes, but also the lands beyond. England, Ireland, the far shores of Francia, all ripe for the taking. "Soon," Astrid whispered to herself, her fingers tracing the coastlines on the map. "Soon, the whole world will know the name of Astrid Ironheart." As if in answer, a cold wind gusted through the hall, making the torches flicker. For just a moment, Astrid thought she saw something in the shadows. A figure, tall and one-eyed, watching her with an unreadable expression. But when she blinked, it was gone. Shaking off the strange feeling, Astrid turned back to her celebrating warriors. There would be time for omens and portents later. For now, there was a new era to usher in, and a destiny to fulfill. The saga of Astrid Ironheart, the shield maiden who would reshape the north, had only just begun. The night sky blazed with an otherworldly light. Streaks of crimson and emerald danced across the heavens, casting an eerie glow over the fjord. Astrid Ironheart stood at the edge of the great hall, her eyes fixed on the unnatural aurora. A chill ran down her spine, one that had nothing to do with the biting cold. "By the gods," Torsten whispered, coming to stand beside her. "I've never seen the sky weep blood like this." Astrid's hand tightened on the hilt of Soul Reaver. "Neither have I, old friend. And I fear it bodes ill for us all." As if in answer to her words, a bone-chilling howl echoed across the fjord. It was followed by another, then another, until the night was filled with the mournful cries of wolves. "The wild hunt," Torsten muttered, making the sign against evil. "Odin rides tonight." Astrid squared her shoulders, pushing down the fear that threatened to rise in her chest. She was Jarl now, leader of a united clan. She couldn't afford to show weakness. "Gather the elders and the Gothi," she commanded. "We need to know what this means." As Torsten hurried off, Astrid's gaze was drawn back to the blood-red sky. In the dancing lights, she could almost see shapes forming. Armies clashing, ships burning. A great wolf with jaws wide enough to swallow the sun. "What are you trying to tell me?" she whispered to the uncaring heavens. The great hall was packed, the air thick with tension and the smoke from the central hearth. Astrid sat in the high seat, her advisors arrayed around her. Before them stood Gyda, the ancient Gothi of their clan, her blind eyes milky white in the firelight. "Speak, Gyda," Astrid commanded. "What do the gods say about these omens?" The old woman raised her gnarled staff, tapping it 3 times on the earthen floor. "The signs are clear, Jarl Astrid. The world trembles on the brink of great change. The blood aurora heralds the coming of war, not just any war, but one that will shake the very foundations of Midgard." Murmurs rippled through the assembled crowd. Astrid leaned forward, her voice low and intense. "What kind of war, Gyda? Against whom do we fight?" Gyda's sightless eyes seemed to fix on Astrid, sending a shiver through the warrior woman. "It is not just a war of men, child. The barriers between worlds grow thin. Giants stir in Jotunheim, and the great wolf Fenrir strains against his bonds." "Ragnarok," someone whispered, the words spreading through the hall like wildfire. "Nonsense," Halfdan, son of the fallen Jarl Eirik, spoke up. "These are just stories to frighten children. We have real enemies to worry about. The Danes to the south, the Swedes to the east, Astrid held up a hand, silencing him. Do not be so quick to dismiss the wisdom of the gods, Halfdan. But you're right. We cannot ignore the threats of this world while we worry about the next. She turned back to Gita. What would you have us do, wise one? The Gothi was silent for a long moment, her wrinkled face creased in concentration. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Seek the one-eyed seer, Jarl Astrid. He who bears Heimdall's gift. Only through his sight can you hope to navigate the storms to come. Confusion rippled through the hall. Astrid's brow furrowed. A one-eyed seer? I know of no such man. He will come to you, Gita replied cryptically. When the time is right, he will come. Before Astrid could press for more information, a commotion erupted at the entrance to the hall. A young shepherd boy burst in, his face pale with fear. Jarl Astrid, he cried. The sheep, they're all dead. The scene in the pastures was one of carnage. Dozens of sheep lay scattered across the blood-soaked grass, their bodies torn and mutilated. Astrid knelt beside one of the carcasses, her experienced eye taking in the savage wounds. No wolf did this, she muttered. Nor any bear I've ever seen. Torsten stood nearby, his face grim. Could it be some kind of sickness? A plague sent by the gods? Astrid shook her head. Look at the wounds, Torsten. Something ripped these animals apart. But what creature could do this to an entire flock in a single night? As if in answer, a ear-splitting roar echoed from the nearby forest. Birds exploded from the treetops in panic. Astrid was on her feet in an instant, Soul Reaver in hand. Form ranks, she shouted to her warriors. Whatever did this might still be out there. The men hastily assembled, shields interlocking to form a wall. Astrid took her place at the front, her eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. For a long, tense moment, nothing happened. Then, with a crash of breaking branches, something enormous burst from the forest. Astrid's breath caught in her throat. It was a wolf, but like no wolf she had ever seen. It stood as tall as a horse, its fur matted with blood and its eyes glowing with an unholy light. Fenrir, someone whispered in terror. Whether it was truly the legendary wolf of myth or some monstrous offspring, Astrid knew they faced a creature of legend. She raised Soul Reaver high, her voice ringing out clear and strong. Stand fast, warriors of the north. We are the children of Odin, and we fear no beast. The monstrous wolf charged, its jaws wide enough to swallow a man whole. Astrid met its rush head-on, Soul Reaver flashing in the pale light. The battle that followed would be sung of in Scalds' tales for generations to come. Astrid fought like one possessed, her axe a blur of motion as she ducked and weaved around the creature's savage attacks. Her warriors supported her, jabbing with spears and raining arrows upon the beast. But for every wound they inflicted, the wolf seemed to grow stronger, more frenzied. Warriors fell to its claws and fangs, their screams mixing with the monster's howls. Just when it seemed the battle was lost, a new voice cut through the chaos. Astrid Ironheart, the eye! Strike for its eye! Astrid whirled to see a stranger standing at the edge of the battlefield. He was a tall man, his left eye covered by a patch, the right blazing with an intensity that made her pause. There was no time to question. The wolf was upon her again, its fetid breath hot on her face. With a war cry that would have made the Valkyries proud, Astrid leapt, bringing Soul Reaver down in a mighty arc. The axe found its mark, sinking deep into the creature's right eye. The wolf let out a howl of agony that shook the very earth. It thrashed wildly, nearly taking Astrid's arm off as she wrenched her weapon free. With a final earth-shaking roar, the monstrous wolf turned and fled back into the forest, leaving a trail of blood in its wake. Silence fell over the battlefield. Astrid stood, chest heaving, covered in blood, both hers and the beast's. Slowly she turned to face the one-eyed stranger. "Who are you?" she demanded. "How did you know?" The man stepped forward, and Astrid saw that his remaining eye was a startling shade of blue, a blue that seemed to hold depths beyond mortal ken. "I am Bjorn," he said, his voice carrying an otherworldly quality. once called Ragnarsson, now named Heimdallsson. And I have seen this day in visions of fire and blood. Astrid's eyes widened as understanding dawned. The one-eyed seer, she whispered. Gyda spoke of you. Bjorn nodded solemnly. I have come, Astrid Ironheart, because the fate of our people hangs in the balance. The wolf you fought today is but a harbinger of what is to come. He gestured to the blood-red sky, where the unnatural aurora still danced. The barriers between worlds grow thin. Ragnarok approaches, and with it, a threat greater than any our people have ever faced. Astrid looked out over the battlefield, at the bodies of her fallen warriors, and the devastation wrought by a single monstrous wolf. If this was just the beginning. She turned back to Bjorn, her voice firm with resolve. Then we must be ready. Tell me, seer, what must we do to save our people? As Bjorn began to speak of visions and prophecies of gods and giants and the fate of worlds, Astrid felt the weight of destiny settling upon her shoulders. She had sought to unite the clans and conquer new lands. Now, it seemed, she would be fighting for the very survival of Midgard itself. The saga of Astrid Ironheart had taken an unexpected turn, one that would lead her into legend, or to the twilight of the gods themselves. The great hall of Astrid Ironheart buzzed with tension. Jarls from across the north had gathered, summoned by urgent messengers bearing tales of blood auroras and monstrous wolves. The air was thick with the smell of smoke, sweat, and barely contained aggression. Astrid sat in the high seat, her face a mask of calm belying the storm of emotions within. To her right stood Bjorn the seer, his single eye scanning the assembled warriors. To her left, Torsten gripped the haft of his axe, ready for any sign of trouble. Jarls of the North, Astrid's voice rang out, silencing the murmurs. I've called you here because a threat looms that endangers not just our individual clans but all of Midgard itself. Snorts of disbelief and muttered curses met her words. Jarl Sigurd the Bear, a mountain of a man with a beard like flame, stepped forward. Pretty words, Ironheart, he growled. But we've all heard the tales of your ambition. How do we know this isn't some trick to bring us under your banner? Astrid's eyes flashed dangerously. You doubt my word, Sigurd? Perhaps you'd like to challenge it with steel? Before Sigurd could respond, Bjorn stepped forward, his voice carrying an otherworldly resonance that silenced even the most skeptical Jarls. I have seen it, he intoned. The wolf Fenrir strains against his bonds. The world serpent, Jormungandr, stirs in the depths. Surtur's fire giants forge their weapons in Muspelheim. Ragnarok approaches, and with it the twilight of gods and men alike. A hush fell over the hall. Even Sigurd looked shaken. But the silence was short-lived. Madness, shouted Jarl Erik Stonefist. You expect us to believe the ravings of a one-eyed madman? Where's your proof, Ironheart? Astrid's hand tightened on Soul Reaver's haft. Proof? You want proof, Erik? Step outside and look at the sky that weeps blood. Ask the families of the warriors who fell to the monstrous wolf that attacked my lands. She stood, her voice rising with passion and conviction. I've seen it with my own eyes, fought it with my own hands. The old tales are awakening, Jarls of the North, and if we don't stand together, we'll fall one by one. The hall erupted into chaos. Jarls argued amongst themselves, some calling for unity, others dismissing the threat as superstition. Astrid watched it all, her frustration mounting. Suddenly the doors of the hall burst open. A young warrior staggered in, his armor stained with blood and soot. Jarl Astrid, he gasped. News from the south. The settlement at Vestfjord. It's gone. Burned to ash. Silence fell like a thunderclap. Astrid leaped from the high seat, crossing to the messenger in 3 long strides. What happened? She demanded. Who attacked? The warrior shook his head, his eyes wide with fear. No one knows. Survivors spoke of giants, Jarl. Giants wielding weapons of flame. They came from the sea in ships that breathed fire. Murmurs of fear rippled through the assembled Jarls. Astrid turned to face them, her voice hard as iron. There's your proof, Eric Stonefist. Will you wait until your own hall burns before you believe? Eric's face had gone pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but was cut off by a booming laugh from Sigurd the bear. Giants and magic? Sigurd sneered. Seems more likely it was the Danes or the Franks. I say we gather our ships and teach these southern dogs a lesson they won't soon forget. A chorus of agreement rose from several jarls. Astrid felt the situation slipping away from her. She looked to Bjorn, a silent plea in her eyes. The seer stepped forward, raising his hands for silence. When he spoke, his voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Hear me, jarls of the north. I was once like you, a warrior who trusted only in steel and strength. But the gods have granted me sight beyond sight. Let me show you what I have seen. With that, Bjorn began to chant in a language older than the hills. The air in the hall grew thick and heavy, and the light seemed to dim. Astrid felt a chill run down her spine as reality itself seemed to waver. Suddenly, the center of the hall was filled with visions. Jarls gasped and stumbled back as they saw giants of flame and ice marching across familiar landscapes. Great serpents rose from the sea, capsizing longships as if they were toys. The sky split open, raining fire and destruction upon the lands of the north. And through it all, a monstrous wolf ran rampant, its jaws wide enough to swallow the sun and moon. The visions faded, leaving the jarls pale and shaken. Bjorn swayed on his feet, steadied by Torsten's strong hand. Astrid seized the moment. Now do you understand this is no ordinary war we face? It's the war, the one spoken of in the oldest tales. Ragnarok itself comes for us all. She paced before the assembled leaders, her voice ringing with authority. But we are the people of the north. We've survived ice and storm, hunger and hardship. Our ancestors sailed to the edges of the world and beyond. If anyone can face this threat and emerge victorious, it's us. Astrid drew Soul Reaver, holding it high. I propose an alliance, not just of our clans, but of all the peoples of the north. Together we can muster a force to rival the gods themselves. The hall was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, Sigurd the bear stepped forward. His eyes met Astrid's, filled with a newfound respect. I've never been one for fancy words or magic tricks, he rumbled, but I know a true leader when I see one. Sigurd the bear and his clan stand with you, Astrid Ironheart. One by one, the other jarls came forward, pledging their support. Even Eric Stonefist, his earlier skepticism replaced by grim determination, bent the knee. The Stonefist clan answers the call, he declared. May our enemies shatter against our united strength. As the jarls swore their oaths, Astrid felt a mix of triumph and trepidation. She had done it, united the clans as she had dreamed. But at what cost? And would it be enough to face the storm that was coming? She turned to Bjorn, who watched the proceedings with his otherworldly gaze. What now, seer? Where do we go from here? Bjorn's single eye seemed to look through her, into realms beyond mortal ken. Now, Astrid Ironheart, we prepare for the greatest battle Midgard has ever seen, a battle that will determine the fate of all the 9 worlds. As if to punctuate his words, a peal of thunder shook the hall. The jarls fell silent, looking to Astrid for guidance. She raised Soul Reaver high, her voice ringing with the authority of a true leader. Then let it be known from this day forward, we are no longer separate clans but one people, one army, united against the forces that would destroy our world. A roar of approval shook the timbers of the hall. Warriors pounded their shields, caught up in the fervor of the moment. But as Astrid looked out over her newly forged alliance, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The real challenges, and the true tests of her leadership, lay ahead. Outside, the blood aurora continued to dance across the sky, a constant reminder of the doom that approached. But now, at least, they would face it together. The saga of Astrid Ironheart, the shield maiden who united the North, had entered a new chapter, one that would be sung of in the halls of Valhalla for eternity, if they survived the coming storm. The longship creaked and groaned as it battled against the relentless waves of the northern sea. Icy winds howled across the deck, carrying with them the promise of an early winter. At the prow stood Astrid Ironheart, her golden hair whipping wildly in the gale, her eyes fixed on the horizon where sea met sky in a bleak gray line. "How much further, Seer?" she called over her shoulder, her voice nearly lost in the wind. Bjorn stood nearby, his one good eye closed in concentration. When he spoke, his words seemed to come from somewhere far beyond the mortal realm. "The veil grows thin," he intoned. "We approach the edges of Midgard, where the branches of Yggdrasil touch the mortal world." Torsten, ever practical, scowled at the cryptic response. "That's all well and good, but will we reach land before this storm tears us apart?" As if in answer, a massive wave crashed over the side of the ship, sending warriors scrambling for purchase on the slick deck. Astrid gripped the dragon-headed prow tighter, her knuckles white beneath her gloves. "We'll make it," she declared, as much to herself as to her companions. "We have to." The journey had begun a fortnight ago, shortly after the gathering of the Jarls. Bjorn's visions had spoken of an ancient Volva, a seeress of unparalleled power, who dwelt in the far north at the very edges of the known world. Only she, Bjorn claimed, could provide the knowledge they needed to face the coming Ragnarok. Astrid had chosen her companions carefully, Bjorn, of course, whose sight would guide them, Torsten, her most trusted warrior, Ylva the Whisperer, whose magic might prove crucial, and a handful of her finest fighters. A small crew, but one that could move swiftly and quietly. Now, as they neared their destination, Astrid found herself questioning the wisdom of this quest. They had left their people preparing for war, and here she was chasing visions and myths. Her doubts were interrupted by a shout from the lookout. "Land ho, dead ahead!" Astrid squinted through the driving sleet. At first, she saw nothing but the endless gray of sea and sky. Then, slowly, a dark mass began to take shape on the horizon. As they drew closer, she realized it wasn't land at all, but a towering wall of ice that stretched as far as the eye could see. "By the gods," Torsten breathed, coming to stand beside her. "Is this the end of the world?" Bjorn's voice was grim. "In a manner of speaking. We've reached the frozen wastes where Midgard meets Niflheim, the realm of mist and cold." Astrid scanned the imposing ice wall, searching for any sign of habitation. "And where exactly is this Volva of yours?" The seer pointed to a barely visible dark spot at the base of the ice cliffs. "There, the entrance to her cave." As they maneuvered the longship closer, the dark spot resolved into the yawning mouth of a cave, its edges smooth as if carved by giant hands. The air grew colder still, and an unnatural mist began to swirl around the ship. "I don't like this," Ylva muttered, her hand straying to the pouch of runes at her belt. "There's old magic here, older than the gods themselves." Astrid set her jaw, determination overriding her own misgivings. "Old magic or not, we've come too far to turn back now. Prepare to make landfall." The longship ground to a halt on a narrow strip of pebbly beach at the base of the ice cliffs. As the crew secured the vessel, Astrid gathered her chosen companions. "Torsten, you'll stay with the ship and half the crew, if we're not back by nightfall." She paused, considering the perpetual twilight that surrounded them. "Or what passes for nightfall in this forsaken place. Take the ship and return to our people. They'll need every warrior they can get." Torsten looked ready to argue, but a stern glance from Astrid silenced him. He clasped her arm instead, warrior to warrior. "May the gods watch over you, Jarl Ironheart." Astrid nodded, then turned to the others. "Bjorn, Ylva, with me. The rest of you guard the entrance. Let nothing in or out without my say-so." With that, the small party made their way towards the looming cave mouth. As they crossed the threshold, the temperature dropped even further, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The walls of the cave glittered with a strange phosphorescent light, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. They had barely gone 100 paces when a bone-chilling howl echoed through the cavern. Astrid's hand flew to Soul Reaver, the axe humming with an eager bloodlust of its own. What manner of beast was that? she hissed. Bjorn's face had gone pale, his single eye wide with recognition. "No beast," he whispered. "Something far worse. Now will you help us or not?" The ancient Volva regarded Astrid for a long moment, her gaze seeming to pierce through flesh and bone to the very soul beneath. Finally she nodded. "Very well, Astrid Ironheart. I will share what I know. But be warned, the price of such knowledge is high. Are you willing to pay it?" Astrid didn't hesitate. "Whatever it takes." Groa's smile was cold and sharp as a midwinter night. "Then follow me, mortals, and pray to your gods that you have the strength to bear what I will show you." With that, she turned and glided deeper into the cave, the phosphorescent light seeming to bend around her. Astrid exchanged glances with her companions, Bjorn grim-faced, Ylva wide-eyed with a mix of fear and excitement. Taking a deep breath, Astrid stepped forward, following the ancient Volva into the depths of the ice cave. With each step, she felt the weight of destiny pressing down upon her shoulders. Whatever lay ahead, she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. As they ventured deeper, the cave walls began to change. The ice gave way to something older, darker, stone-carved with runes so ancient they predated written language. Astrid felt a sense of vertigo, as if she were walking not just through space, but through time itself. Finally, they emerged into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in shadows high above. At the center stood a pool of water so still it resembled a mirror of obsidian. Of the future she had glimpsed in the Well of Erd, and she knew that to falter now would be to condemn not just the North, but all the 9 worlds, to destruction. Astrid raised Soul Reaver high, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "Warriors of the North, children of Odin, this day we face our greatest test, but we are the people who tamed the sea and conquered distant shores. We are the descendants of giants and gods, and we will not go quietly into the long night." A roar went up from her warriors, a sound to rival Fenrir's howl. Astrid turned to face the great wolf, Soul Reaver humming with anticipation in her hands. "Come then, beast," she snarled. "Let's see if the spawn of Loki bleeds as red as any mortal." With that she charged, her warriors at her heels. Fenrir's massive head swung towards them, jaws opening wide to reveal an abyss lined with teeth the size of swords. The clash, when it came, shook the very foundations of Midgard. Astrid's axe bit deep into Fenrir's leg, drawing first blood. But the wolf seemed barely to notice, sweeping a massive paw that sent warriors flying like leaves in a storm. The battle raged, fierce and terrible. Astrid's warriors fought with a courage born of desperation, harrying the great wolf from all sides. But for every wound they inflicted, Fenrir's fury only seemed to grow. In the midst of the chaos, Astrid caught sight of Bjorn. The seer stood apart from the battle, his single eye blazing with an otherworldly light. As Torsten hurried off, Astrid allowed herself one moment of doubt. Were they truly ready to face not just Fenrir, but the might of Muspelheim as well? But there was no time for such thoughts. Her people needed her to be strong, to be the leader they deserved. With a final nod to Ivaldi, she strode from the forge, her mind already racing with battle plans and strategies. The journey back to Midgard was a blur of haste and tension. Every moment felt precious, every delay an agony. When they finally emerged from the hidden paths between realms, Astrid's heart sank at the sight that greeted them. The sky was choked with ash and smoke, turning day into a hellish twilight. In the distance, great pillars of flame marked the advance of the fire giants. And above it all, the howls of Fenrir and his brood echoed like the death knells of the world itself. "To the Ravenswood," Astrid commanded, her voice carrying over the din of panicked preparations. "We make our stand there, or not at all." As they approached the ancient forest, Astrid was heartened to see that her orders had been followed. Warriors from across the north had gathered, a sea of grim faces and readied weapons. At the edge of the woods, she spotted Bjorn and Ylva, surrounded by a group of newly trained cedar workers. Astrid dismounted, striding towards her advisors. "Report," she demanded. Bjorn's single eye was clouded with worry. "It's bad, Astrid. The giants number in the hundreds, and Fenrir. It's grown. Fed on the fear and destruction it's wrought." Ylva stepped forward, her face pale but determined. "We've woven what protections we can around the Ravenswood. They should slow the advance, give us time to prepare." Astrid nodded, her mind racing. "Good. Distribute the dwarf-forged weapons to our best warriors. Bjorn, I want your cedar workers spread out along the line. Their magic might be our best defense against the giant's fire." As her orders were carried out, Astrid climbed a small rise to address the assembled forces. Looking out over the sea of faces, some familiar, many not, she felt the weight of responsibility settle heavy on her shoulders. "Warriors of the North," her voice rang out, silencing the murmurs of the crowd. "The hour we've prepared for is upon us. Fenrir and the forces of Muspelheim march on our lands, thinking to find us weak and divided." She unsheathed Soul Reaver, holding it high. The axe seemed to pulse with eagerness for the coming battle. "But we are not weak. We are not divided. We are the people of the North, descendants of giants and gods alike. And we will not go quietly into the long night." A roar went up from the assembled warriors, weapons clashing against shields in a thunderous display of defiance. "Let them come," Astrid continued, her voice rising with passion. "Let them taste northern steel and northern courage, and let the skald sing of this day for 1,000 years to come." As the cheers reached a fever pitch, Astrid felt a surge of pride and determination. Whatever came, they would face it together. But even as she basked in the moment of unity, a shadow of doubt crept into her heart. There was something off, a tension in the air that went beyond the looming battle. Her instincts, honed by years of leadership and warfare, screamed a warning. There was a threat here, one closer than the approaching army of giants and wolf spawn. Astrid's eyes scanned the crowd, searching for any sign of the unease she felt. Most faces showed only grim determination or fierce excitement. But there, at the edge of the gathering, a hooded figure slipped away from the main group, moving with a furtiveness that set alarm bells ringing in Astrid's mind. Without a word to her lieutenants, she leapt from the rise and began to follow, her hand never straying far from Soul Reaver's haft. The figure led her on a winding path through the outskirts of the camp, always staying just ahead, just out of clear sight. Astrid's suspicion grew with each step. This was no mere scout or messenger. This was someone who didn't want to be seen. Finally, in a small clearing just beyond the edge of the camp, the figure stopped. Astrid pressed herself against a tree, straining to hear. "It's done," a voice said, male, vaguely familiar. "The Jarl suspects nothing. When the battle is joined, I'll ensure she's isolated from the main force. You'll have your shot at her then." A second voice responded, this one sending a chill down Astrid's spine. It was deep, resonant, and utterly inhuman. "Good," it rumbled. "Loki will be pleased. With Ironheart fallen, the North's resistance will crumble, and our master will finally be free to take his rightful place among the gods." Astrid had heard enough. She stepped into the clearing, Soul Reaver held ready. "Show yourself, traitor," she snarled. The hooded figure whirled, throwing back his cowl to reveal Halfdan, son of the fallen Jarl Eirik. "Astrid," he gasped, his face a mask of shock and fear. I can explain." But Astrid's attention was fixed on the other presence in the clearing. Where the inhuman voice had come from, the very air seemed to twist and warp, as if reality itself rejected what stood there. "Oh, I think explanations are a bit beyond you now, Halfdan," she said, her voice cold as midwinter ice. "Consorting with Loki's get? Plotting against your own people? There's only one word for that. Treason." Halfdan's shock gave way to a sneer of defiance. "You fool," he spat. "You think you can stand against the tide of Ragnarok? Loki offers a way out, a chance to be on the winning side when the dust settles." "There won't be any dust to settle if Fenrir and his ilk have their way," Astrid retorted, There won't be a world left to rule. The air shimmered again, and this time Astrid caught a glimpse of something that made her stomach churn. Eyes like pits of flame, a mouth full of needle-sharp teeth, and then it was gone, vanished between one blink and the next. Halfdan used the momentary distraction to draw his sword. "It doesn't matter now," he snarled. "You weren't supposed to find out until it was too late, but I'll remedy that right now." He lunged forward, his blade whistling through the air. But Astrid hadn't survived countless battles by being slow. Soul Reaver met Halfdan's sword with a clash of sparks, the dwarf-forged metal easily turning aside the lesser blade. "You never could beat me in the training yard, Halfdan," Astrid taunted, circling warily. "What makes you think you can do it now?" With a roar of frustration, Halfdan attacked again, his sword a blur of desperate strikes. But Astrid met each one, her movements fluid and precise. She had been holding back, she realized. Part of her still saw Halfdan as the brash young warrior she had once mentored. That hesitation nearly cost her. Halfdan's blade slipped past her guard, opening a shallow cut on her arm. The sting of it shocked Astrid back to the reality of the situation. This wasn't a training bout. This was life or death. "Enough," she growled. In a move too fast for Halfdan to follow, Astrid feinted left, then brought Soul Reaver around in a vicious arc. The axe bit deep into Halfdan's sword arm, nearly severing it at the elbow. Halfdan screamed, his weapon clattering to the ground as he collapsed. Astrid stood over him, Soul Reaver raised for a killing blow. "Wait!" Halfdan gasped, his face pale with pain and fear. "Mercy, Astrid, I was wrong, I see that now." Astrid hesitated, searching Halfdan's face for any sign of sincerity. But all she saw was the same cunning, the same self-serving ambition that had led him to betray his people. "There's no mercy for traitors," she said softly. "Not with the fate of the world hanging in the balance." But before she could deliver the final strike, a blast of otherworldly energy sent her staggering backward. The shimmering in the air coalesced into a vaguely humanoid shape, its edges blurred and shifting. "Enough of this," the thing that could only be one of Loki's servants hissed. "You've outlived your usefulness, human." With impossible speed it lashed out at Halfdan. There was a sickening crunch, and the traitor's eyes went wide with shock. He opened his mouth to speak, but only blood came out. Astrid watched in horror as Halfdan's body seemed to shrivel, the very life force drained from him in moments. The Loki thing grew more solid, more real, feeding on the stolen vitality. "And now for you, Astrid Ironheart," it said, its voice a symphony of broken glass and screaming winds. "My master sends his regards." Astrid raised Soul Reaver, her heart pounding. She had faced giants, monsters, and the great wolf Fenrir himself. But this was something altogether different. Something that didn't belong in the world of men or gods. As the thing lunged for her, its form twisting into something out of nightmare, Astrid sent up a silent prayer to any god that might be listening. The battle for the fate of the North, and perhaps all the 9 worlds, had truly begun. The sky above Ravenswood burned. Great gouts of flame arced through the air, hurled by the advancing army of fire giants. The ancient trees, once thought impenetrable, now crackled and smoldered under the onslaught. And above it all, the monstrous form of Fenrir loomed, a shadow blacker than the smoke-filled sky. Astrid Ironheart stood at the forefront of her assembled forces, Soul Reaver gleaming with an otherworldly light in her hands. The encounter with Halfdan and Loki's servant had left her shaken, but there was no time for doubt. Not now, with the fate of Midgard hanging in the balance. "Hold the line," she roared, her voice carrying over the din of battle preparations. "Remember your training. Trust in each other, and in the strength of the North." Beside her, Bjorn's single eye blazed with the power of Heimdall's sight. "They come," he intoned, his voice distant and echoing. "A tide of fire and fury with Fenrir at its head." Astrid nodded grimly. "Then let them come. We'll show them the meaning of northern steel and northern courage." As if in answer to her defiance, a bone-chilling howl split the air. Fenrir had caught their scent. "Cider workers," Astrid called. "Now!" Ylva stepped forward, leading a group of newly trained magic users. They began to chant, their voices rising in an eerie harmony. The air around the Ravenswood shimmer edged and twisted as protective wards sprang into being. No sooner had the magical defenses been erected than the first wave of fire giants crashed against them. The giants were monstrous things, easily twice the height of a man, their skin crackling with inner flame. They beat against the magical barrier with fists like battering rams, each blow sending shockwaves through the assembled defenders. "Archers," Astrid commanded. "Let fly!" A hail of arrows, their heads forged by dwarven hands and enchanted by cedar, arced over the barrier. Many found their mark, sinking deep into giant flesh. Where they struck, ice bloomed, a stark contrast to the giants' fiery nature. The giants roared in pain and fury, redoubling their efforts to breach the ward. Astrid could see the strain on Ylva's face as she and her apprentices fought to maintain the barrier. "It won't hold much longer," Bjorn warned, his voice tight with tension. Astrid nodded. "It doesn't need to. It just needs to hold long enough." Even as she spoke, a resounding crack echoed across the battlefield. The magical barrier shattered like glass, and the fire giants poured through the gap. "For the north!" Astrid bellowed, raising Soul Reaver high. "For Midgard!" With a roar that would have made their ancestors proud, the warriors of the north met the charge of the fire giants. The clash of steel on giant flesh rang out, punctuated by screams of pain and fury from both sides. Astrid was in the thick of it, Soul Reaver singing its deadly song. The dwarf-forged axe bit deep into giant flesh, its enchanted edge able to pierce even their flame-hardened skin. But for every giant that fell, two more seemed to take its place. Through the chaos of battle, Astrid caught glimpses of her companions. Torsten, his face a mask of grim determination, led a wedge of shield warriors, driving back a knot of giants with coordinated precision. Ylva, her hands weaving complex patterns in the air, called down bolts of lightning that struck the invaders with unerring accuracy. And Bjorn was a whirlwind of destruction. His single eye blazed with divine fire as he moved through the battle with impossible speed and grace. Where he struck, giants fell, their flames extinguished by the power of Heimdall flowing through him. For a moment, Astrid allowed herself to hope. They were holding their own, against all odds. Perhaps they could. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sound that shook the very earth beneath her feet. Fenrir had joined the fray. The great wolf tore through the battlefield like a force of nature, friend and foe alike crushed beneath its massive paws. Its jaws, large enough to swallow a longship whole, snapped shut on a group of warriors, their screams cut horrifyingly short. "To me!" Astrid shouted, gathering a group of her best fighters. "We end this now!" They fought their way through the melee, dodging gouts of giant flame and the snapping jaws of Fenrir's lesser offspring. Finally, they stood before the monstrous wolf itself. Fenrir's eyes, burning with infernal fire, fixed upon Astrid. There was intelligence in that gaze, and a hatred older than the world itself. "Fenrir," Astrid called, her voice somehow carrying over the din of battle. "Face me, you overgrown mongrel. Or are you afraid of a mere mortal?" The great wolf's lips pulled back in what might have been a grin, revealing rows of teeth the size of longswords. It spoke, its voice a growl that resonated in Astrid's very bones. "Little mortal," it rumbled. "You think to challenge me? I, who am destined to devour the sun itself." Astrid raised Soul Reaver, the axe humming with anticipation. "Destiny can change, wolf, and I've got an axe here that's hungry for god blood." With a roar that shook the heavens, Fenrir lunged. Astrid dove to the side, feeling the rush of air as massive jaws snapped shut where she had been standing. She rolled to her feet, bringing Soul Reaver around in a vicious arc that bit deep into Fenrir's flank. The wolf howled in pain and fury, whirling with a speed that belied its massive size. Its paw lashed out, catching one of Astrid's warriors and sending him flying. The man hit a tree with a sickening crunch and didn't get up. "Spread out," Astrid commanded. Don't let it focus on any one of us." Her remaining warriors obeyed, harrying Fenrir from all sides. They darted in and out, their dwarf-forged weapons drawing ichor with each strike. But it wasn't enough. For every wound they inflicted, Fenrir seemed to grow stronger, more frenzied. Astrid's mind raced, searching for a solution. They couldn't outlast the wolf, couldn't overpower it through sheer force. There had to be another way. Suddenly, Bjorn's words from their encounter with the vulva echoed in her mind. Fenrir's eternal enemy. He had called Heimdall. And now Bjorn wielded a portion of Heimdall's power. "Bjorn," Astrid shouted, "your eye, use Heimdall's sight." The seer understood immediately. He closed his mortal eye and opened the other, the eye that saw beyond the veils of reality. Divine fire blazed forth, striking Fenrir like a physical blow. The wolf staggered, momentarily blinded. It was the opening Astrid had been waiting for. With a war cry that would have made the Valkyries proud, she charged. Soul Reaver, powered by her indomitable will and the strength of the North itself, struck true. The axe bit deep into Fenrir's chest, sinking to the haft in godflesh. The wolf let out a howl of agony that shook the very foundations of Midgard. It thrashed wildly, nearly taking Astrid's arm off as she wrenched her weapon free. For a moment, the entire battlefield seemed to hold its breath. Fenrir swayed, black ichor pouring from the wound in its chest. Then, with a sound like the breaking of the world, it fell. The impact shook the earth, sending both defender and invader stumbling. A silence fell over the Ravenswood, broken only by the crackling of flames and the groans of the wounded. Astrid stood over the fallen form of Fenrir, her chest heaving with exertion. The wolf's eyes, once blazing with infernal fire, now dimmed like dying embers. "It's over," she breathed, scarcely daring to believe it. But even as the words left her lips, a cold laugh echoed across the battlefield. A figure materialized beside Fenrir's massive head, tall, lean, with a face that might have been handsome if not for the cruel twist of its lips. "Oh, little mortal," Loki said, for it could be none other than the trickster god himself. "It's far from over. You've played your part admirably, I'll give you that. But did you really think it would be so easy to derail Ragnarok?" With a gesture, Loki sent a wave of sickly green energy washing over Fenrir's form. Before Astrid's horrified eyes, the wolf's wounds began to close, its eyes rekindling with unholy light. "You see," Loki continued, his voice dripping with malicious glee, "Fenrir's defeat was prophesied, but so too was his rise. And now, thanks to you, he's stronger than ever." Fenrir began to stir, its massive form shifting as it regained consciousness. Astrid raised Soul Reaver, though she knew in her heart it would not be enough. Not this time. But before either god or mortal could make a move, a new sound split the air. It was a horn blast, so loud and pure it seemed to make the very air vibrate. Astrid felt it in her bones, a call that spoke of hope and defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. Loki's smug expression faltered. "No," he whispered. "It can't be." From the east, a light began to grow. It was not the ruddy glow of the fire giant's flames, nor the sickly radiance of Loki's magic. This was a pure, golden light that drove back the shadows and made even the gods shield their eyes. And riding that light like the dawn itself given form, came an army such as Midgard had never seen. Einherjar, the chosen warriors of Valhalla, led by none other than Odin himself. The All-Father rode at their head, Gungnir gleaming in his hand, his one eye blazing with the wisdom of ages. "It seems," Odin's voice boomed across the battlefield, "that the mortals have proven themselves worthy of aid. What say you, Loki? Shall we finish this dance once and for all?" As gods and Einherjar crashed into the remains of the giant army, Astrid felt a surge of renewed hope. The battle for Midgard was far from over, but now, at least, they did not fight alone. With a fierce grin, she raised Soul Reaver once more. "Come on, you bastards," she roared. "Let's show these gods how mortals fight." And with that, Astrid Ironheart, Jarl of the North, charged back into the fray. For the fate of Midgard, and all the 9 worlds, hung in the balance, and she, a mere mortal, would have her say in how the story ended. The battlefield was chaos incarnate. The clash of steel on steel mingled with the roars of giants and the battle cries of gods and mortals alike. The very air crackled with energy as divine powers collided, sending shockwaves across the ravaged landscape of Ravenswood. Astrid Ironheart stood at the center of it all, Soul Reaver gleaming with an otherworldly light in her blood-stained hands. Her armor was dented and scorched, her golden hair matted with sweat and gore. But her eyes burned with an indomitable fire as she surveyed the scene before her. To her left, Odin Allfather himself battled against a group of fire giants, Gungnir flashing like lightning as it struck down foe after foe. To her right, Thor's hammer Mjolnir sang its thunderous song as it crushed giant skulls and scattered wolf spawn like leaves in a storm. And there, at the heart of the melee, Loki faced off against his age-old nemesis Heimdall. The 2 gods moved with impossible speed, their forms blurring as they struck at each other with millennia of pent-up hatred. But Astrid had no time to marvel at the clash of divine powers. Her focus was on a more immediate threat, Fenrir newly revived and more terrible than ever, the great wolf's eyes fixed on her, burning with a hatred older than the world itself. "Little mortal," it growled, its voice shaking the very ground beneath their feet. "You dare to stand against me? Against the tide of Ragnarok itself?" Astrid raised Soul Reaver, her voice ringing out clear and defiant. "I dare, beast. For my people, for Midgard. I dare." With a roar that shook the heavens, Fenrir lunged. Astrid dove to the side, feeling the rush of air as massive jaws snapped shut where she had been standing. She rolled to her feet, bringing Soul Reaver around in a vicious arc that bit deep into Fenrir's flank. The wolf howled in pain and fury, whirling with a speed that belied its massive size. Its paw lashed out, catching Astrid square in the chest and sending her flying. She hit the ground hard, the breath driven from her lungs. As she struggled to her feet, gasping for air, a familiar voice cut through the din of battle. "Astrid!" It was Bjorn, his single eye blazing with Heimdall's power. The eye. Strike for its eye. Understanding dawned. Fenrir was a creature of prophecy, bound by the rules of fate. But Bjorn's gift, Heimdall's sight, allowed him to see beyond those bonds, to find the weak points in destiny itself. Astrid nodded, a plan forming in her mind. "Bjorn," she shouted, "can you blind it, just for a moment?" The seer understood immediately. He closed his mortal eye and opened the other, the eye that saw beyond the veils of reality. Divine fire blazed forth, striking Fenrir full in the face. The wolf reared back, momentarily blinded and disoriented. It was the opening Astrid had been waiting for. With a war cry that would have made her ancestors proud, she charged. Soul Reaver, powered by her indomitable will and the strength of the North itself, struck true. The axe sank deep into Fenrir's left eye socket, black ichor spraying forth in a grotesque fountain. The wolf's howl of agony shook the very foundations of Midgard, sending both god and mortal staggering. But Astrid wasn't done. With a grunt of effort, she wrenched Soul Reaver free and struck again, this time at the wolf's other eye. Fenrir thrashed wildly, its massive paws lashing out in blind fury. One caught Astrid, sending her tumbling across the battlefield. She hit the ground hard, feeling ribs crack under the impact. Through a haze of pain, she saw Fenrir staggering, blood pouring from its ruined eyes. But it wasn't enough. The wolf was wounded, yes, but far from defeated. "Astrid!" The voice was Ylva's, the seeress appearing at her side as if by magic. "The bindings. We can recreate them." Of course. The magical fetters that had once bound Fenrir before Loki's treachery had set it free. But how? As if in answer to her unspoken question, Odin's voice boomed across the battlefield. "The Gleipnir," he called. "Forged from 6 impossible things. Recreate it, mortals, with the power of your belief." Astrid's mind raced. Impossible things. What was more impossible than mortals standing against the tide of Ragnarok? She struggled to her feet, ignoring the screaming pain in her ribs. "Ylva," she gasped, "gather the cedar workers. We're going to bind a god." As Ylva rushed to obey, Astrid raised her voice, calling out to all who could hear. "Warriors of the North, children of Midgard, lend me your strength, your courage, your defiance in the face of fate itself." Around her, the battle seemed to pause as mortal and god alike turned to listen. "We are the impossible things," Astrid continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "The breath of a fish, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the spittle of a bird, the beard of a woman, the footsteps of a cat. We are all these things and more." As she spoke, Ylva and her satyr workers began to chant, weaving magic older than the gods themselves. The air around them shimmered and twisted, reality itself bending to the force of their combined will. "We are the people who tamed the sea and conquered distant shores," Astrid's voice rang out, clear and strong. "We are the descendants of giants and gods, the children of ice and fire." The shimmering in the air began to coalesce, taking on a physical form, a chain of impossible thinness, yet radiating strength beyond mortal comprehension. "And we say this, Fenrir, son of Loki. You will not have our world." With a sound like the breaking of fate itself, the new Gleipnir sprang into being. It lashed out, wrapping itself around Fenrir's massive form. The wolf howled in fury and disbelief, thrashing against bonds made from the very essence of mortal defiance. But the Gleipnir held. Fenrir's struggles grew weaker, its howls turning to whimpers as the impossible chain tightened. A cheer went up from the assembled warriors of Midgard, a sound of triumph and disbelief in equal measure. They had done it. They had bound Fenrir anew. But their celebration was short-lived, for even as Fenrir fell, Loki's laughter rang out across the battlefield. "Oh, well done," the trickster god applauded, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You've bound my son once more. But did you really think that was the extent of my plan?" With a gesture, Loki tore a hole in the very fabric of reality. Through it, Astrid could see a realm of fire and shadow, Muspelheim, home of the fire giants. "Behold," Loki crowed, "the true face of Ragnarok. Surtur himself comes to claim Midgard, and all the 9 worlds with it." Through the portal strode a figure that dwarfed even the mightiest of the fire giants. Surtur, lord of Muspelheim, his body wreathed in flames hot enough to melt the very stones beneath his feet. In his hand he held a sword that blazed brighter than the sun, promising the end of all things. Astrid felt her heart sink. They had given everything to bind Fenrir, and now this? How could they hope to stand against such a foe? But then, a hand clasped her shoulder. She turned to see Odin himself standing beside her, his one eye gleaming with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Was it pride? "Well fought, Astrid Ironheart," the Allfather said, his voice resonating with power. "You and your people have proven yourselves worthy 100 times over this day. But now I fear it falls to the gods to finish what you've begun." Before Astrid could respond, Odin raised Gungnir high. "To me, Aesir and Vanir," he called. "Let us meet our fate with courage and honor." As the gods of Asgard rallied to Odin's call, Astrid felt a tugging sensation. The world around her began to blur and fade as if she were being pulled away from the scene. "What's happening?" she demanded, trying to fight against the strange force. Odin's voice seemed to come from very far away. "We send you back, Astrid Ironheart, back to Midgard, to your people. For whatever the outcome of this battle, the world of men must endure." "No," Astrid cried, reaching out as if she could physically hold on to the fading battlefield. "Let me stay. Let me fight." But her protests were in vain. The last thing she saw before the world went dark was Odin turning to face Surtur, Gungnir blazing with the light of 1,000 suns. Then, darkness. Astrid awoke with a gasp, sitting bolt upright. She was in her bed? In her longhouse? How? Easy there, my Jarl, a familiar voice soothed. It was Ylva, looking exhausted but very much alive. You've been unconscious for 3 days. 3 days? Astrid's mind reeled. But the battle, Fenrir, Surtur. Ylva's face was a mixture of wonder and confusion. We won, Astrid. Somehow. The giants are gone, Fenrir is bound once more, but the gods… She trailed off, shaking her head in disbelief. What about the gods? Astrid demanded. They're gone, Ylva said softly. All of them. Odin, Thor, even Loki. It's as if they never existed. The only proof we have that any of it happened are the scars on the land, and the stories we'll tell. Astrid sat in stunned silence, trying to process it all. They had faced Ragnarok itself and emerged victorious. But at what cost? As if reading her thoughts, Ylva spoke again. The world has changed, Astrid. The age of gods and monsters is over. What comes next, that's up to us. Astrid nodded slowly, her mind already racing with the challenges that lay ahead. Rebuilding, healing, forging a new future for her people in a world without gods. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, ignoring the protests of her battered body. Then we'd best get started, she said, her voice filled with determination. There's work to be done. As she stood, leaning on Ylva for support, Astrid felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders once more. But this time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like purpose. The fjord lay shrouded in mist as dawn broke over the small Norwegian village of Ravenholm. Ingvild stood at the water's edge, her imposing figure casting a long shadow across the pebbled shore. At 17 winters, she towered over everyone in the village, her frame solid as an oak and her auburn hair wild as flame. She hefted a large boulder with ease, skipping it across the water's surface. The stone bounced 5 times before sinking into the depths with a satisfying plunk. Ingvild sighed, her breath visible in the crisp morning air. Impressive, came a voice from behind her. But it won't make them accept you any more than they do now. Ingvild turned to see her mother, Sigrid, approaching with a basket of freshly gathered herbs. The older woman's face was etched with worry lines, her once golden hair now streaked with gray. I don't need their acceptance, Ingvild growled, though the quiver in her voice betrayed her true feelings. Sigrid placed a gentle hand on her daughter's arm. Ingvild, my love, Their conversation was cut short by the blaring of a horn from the village. Both women's heads snapped toward the sound, instantly alert. Raiders, Sigrid whispered, her face paling. Without hesitation, Ingvild sprinted toward the village, her long legs eating up the distance. As she crested the hill, she saw the cause of the alarm. 3 longships cutting through the fog, their dragon-headed prows bearing down on Ravenholm's meager defenses. The village erupted into chaos. Men scrambled for weapons while women and children fled to the relative safety of the nearby forest. Ingvild's keen eyes spotted the village elder, Gunnar, shouting orders from the central square. Form a shield wall, he bellowed, his white beard quivering with each word. Protect the longhouse. Ingvild pushed her way through the panicking crowd, ignoring the usual mix of fear and disgust in their eyes. She approached Gunnar, who regarded her with suspicion. I can help, she said, her voice firm. Gunnar's eyes narrowed. We need warriors, girl, not freaks of nature. The words stung, but Ingvild stood her ground. I'm stronger than any 3 men here. You know this. Before Gunnar could respond, the first wave of raiders hit the shore. Their war cries filled the air, chilling the blood of even the bravest defenders. Ingvild watched in horror as the village's hastily assembled shield wall began to buckle under the onslaught. Without waiting for permission, she charged toward the fray. As she ran, Ingvild scooped up a massive wooden log that normally required 4 men to lift. With a roar that rivaled the raiders' own battle cries, she swung the improvised weapon like a giant's club. The first raider to face her barely had time to look surprised before the log connected with his chest, sending him flying back into his comrades. Ingvild pressed her advantage, each swing of the log clearing a swath through the invaders' ranks. By Odin's beard, she heard one of the village defenders exclaim. Look at her go! For once, the stares directed at Ingvild were filled with awe rather than fear. She felt a surge of pride, allowing herself a fierce grin as she continued to beat back the raiders. The battle raged on with Ingvild at the forefront. Her inhuman strength and endurance began to turn the tide. Raiders who had come expecting easy prey now found themselves facing a foe out of legend. As the fighting reached its peak, Ingvild found herself face to face with the raid leader, a bear of a man with a scarred face and a gleaming axe. "What manner of creature are you?" he snarled, circling her warily. Ingvild hefted her log, now slick with blood. "I am Ingvild of Ravenholm," she declared, her voice ringing out across the battlefield. "And you are not welcome here." The raid leader charged with a roar, his axe whistling through the air. Ingvild met his attack head-on, the log splintering as it connected with the axe blade. The impact sent shockwaves through both combatants, but while the raider staggered back, Ingvild stood firm. Taking advantage of her opponent's momentary disorientation, Ingvild lunged forward. She grabbed the man by his tunic and with a feat of strength that left onlookers gasping, lifted him bodily over her head. "Leave," she growled, "and never return." With that, she hurled the raid leader through the air. He landed with a splash in the shallows near one of the longships, sputtering and cursing. "Retreat!" he bellowed, struggling to his feet. "This place is protected by giants." The remaining raiders needed no further encouragement. They scrambled back to their ships, many casting fearful glances over their shoulders at Ingvild's towering form. As the last longship disappeared into the mist, a stunned silence fell over Ravenholm. Ingvild stood amidst the carnage, her chest heaving with exertion, waiting for the villagers' reaction. Slowly, tentatively, a cheer began to build. Soon, the entire village was shouting her name, their former fear forgotten in the wake of her heroism. But as the adrenaline of battle faded, Ingvild became aware of hushed whispers and pointed fingers. She looked down at her arms, expecting to see battle wounds. Instead, she saw that her skin had taken on a pale, almost bluish tint, with faint patterns like frost on a window pane. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Ingvild's triumphant smile faded as she realized that her victory had come at a cost. The truth of her nature was now undeniable. Elder Gunnar pushed his way to the front of the gathering, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. "Ingvild," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of hidden knowledge, "it's time you knew the truth. Come to the longhouse. Bring your mother." As Ingvild followed Gunnar, the crowd parted before her. Their expressions were a mix of awe, gratitude, and rekindled fear. She caught sight of her mother at the edge of the group, tears streaming down Sigrid's face. Inside the longhouse, Gunnar gestured for Ingvild and Sigrid to sit. The old man paced for a moment, gathering his thoughts before fixing Ingvild with a penetrating stare. "You've always known you were different," he began, "but the truth is far stranger than you could have imagined. Ingvild, you are not fully human. The blood that runs through your veins is that of the Jötnar, the frost giants of our legends." Ingvild felt as though the ground had dropped out from beneath her. She turned to her mother, questions burning in her eyes. Sigrid nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's true, my dear. Your father, he was not of this world. But he loved us, in his way." As the full implications of this revelation washed over her, Ingvild stood abruptly, her head nearly brushing the longhouse's rafters. I need to think," she said, her voice shaking. She strode out of the longhouse, ignoring the calls of her mother and the elder. The villagers scattered before her as she made her way back to the fjord's edge, her mind reeling. Ingvild stared out at the mist-covered water, her reflection rippling in the gentle waves. For the first time, she truly saw herself, not as a misfit, but as a bridge between two worlds. The question that had plagued her all her life had been answered, but in its place 100 more sprang up. As the sun finally broke through the mist, illuminating the fjord in golden light, Ingvild made a decision. She could no longer stay in Ravenholm. Her path, for better or worse, lay beyond the horizon. With one last look at the village that had been her home, Ingvild set her jaw with determination. Giant's blood flowed in her veins, and it was time she discovered what that truly meant. The longship crested another wave, sending a spray of icy water over the bow. Ingvild stood at the prow, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the jagged coastline of Jarl Hakon's territory was finally coming into view. The journey from Ravenholm had been long and treacherous, but it had given her time to come to terms with her newfound heritage. Beside her stood Bjorn, the ambitious Viking warrior who had offered to guide her to Hakon's court. His weathered face broke into a grin as he spotted the approaching shoreline. "There it is, Giant Blood," he said, using the nickname he'd given her. "Ravenfjord, home to the most cunning jarl in all of Norway." Ingvild nodded, her stomach churning with a mix of anticipation and dread. "And you're certain he'll hear me out?" Bjorn laughed, a sound like gravel in a storm. "Oh, he'll hear you out all right. Hakon never turns away a potential asset. But be warned, he'll test you in ways you can't imagine." As they approached the docks, Ingvild marveled at the bustling port town. Ships from land she'd only heard of in stories were moored alongside local fishing boats. The air was thick with the scents of fish, spices, and the smoke from 100 hearth fires. No sooner had their ship docked than they were approached by a group of armed men. Their leader, a stern-faced warrior with a silver arm ring denoting his rank. "State your business," he demanded, eyeing Ingvild's towering form with suspicion. Bjorn stepped forward, arms spread in a gesture of peace. "Greetings, Ulf. Still guarding the docks like a faithful hound, I see. We seek an audience with Jarl Hakon. I bring him a gift beyond measure." Ulf's eyes narrowed. "And what gift would that be?" Bjorn twice exiled. "Not what, but who," Bjorn replied, gesturing grandly toward Ingvild. "I present Ingvild of Ravenholm, slayer of raiders and daughter of frost giants." A murmur ran through the gathered crowd. Ingvild felt their stares like physical weight, but she stood tall, meeting Ulf's gaze without flinching. After a tense moment, Ulf nodded. "Follow me. But know that any trouble, and you'll both feel the bite of my axe." As they made their way through the town toward Hakon's great hall, Ingvild couldn't help but marvel at the sights. Ravenfjord was a far cry from her small village, with its bustling markets, skilled craftsmen, and warriors from every corner of the Norse world. The great hall loomed before them, its massive timber frame decorated with intricate carvings of gods and beasts. Two enormous wooden statues of ravens flanked the entrance, their eyes seeming to follow Ingvild as she approached. Inside, the hall was alive with activity. Warriors drank and boasted of their deeds, skalds recited poetry, and at the far end, seated on a high chair, was Jarl Hakon himself. Hakon was not what Ingvild had expected. Rather than a hulking warrior, she saw a man of average height with keen eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His beard was neatly trimmed, and he wore fine clothes adorned with gold and silver. As they approached, Hakon held up a hand, silencing the hall. His gaze locked onto Ingvild, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Well, well," he said, his voice carrying easily across the room. Bjorn, twice exiled, returns, and with quite the companion. "Tell me, girl, are you truly what he claims? A giant's offspring?" Ingvild stepped forward, forcing herself to meet the Jarl's piercing gaze. "I am Ingvild of Ravenholm, my lord. I only recently learned of my heritage, but I stand ready to prove my worth." Hakon leaned forward, intrigued. "Prove your worth, you say? And how would you do that?" Before Ingvild could respond, a voice called out from the crowd. "Let her face the trials of Odin." The hall erupted in shouts of agreement. Hakon raised a hand and silence fell once more. "The trials of Odin," he mused, stroking his beard. "It has been many years since anyone has attempted them. Are you prepared, Ingvild of Ravenholm, to risk everything for a place in my court?" Ingvild's heart raced, but her voice remained steady. "I am, my lord." Hakon clapped his hands together. "Excellent. We shall begin at dawn. For now, eat, drink, and rest. You'll need your strength." As the hall returned to its revels, Ingvild found herself surrounded by curious warriors and shield maidens, all eager to hear her story. She recounted the battle at Ravenholm, careful not to embellish but unable to hide the pride in her voice. As the night wore on, Ingvild noticed a figure watching her from the shadows. A woman, tall and lithe, with eyes that seemed to glow in the firelight. As their gazes met, the woman approached. "I am Astrid," she said, her voice low and melodious. "The Jarl's seeress. Your coming has been foretold, Ingvild Giant's daughter." Ingvild felt a chill run down her spine. "Foretold? What do you mean?" Astrid's eyes seemed to look through Ingvild, seeing something beyond. "The threads of fate are tangled around you. Great deeds lie in your future, but also great danger. Be wary, for not all in this hall wish you well." Before Ingvild could press for more information, Astrid melted back into the crowd, leaving her with more questions than answers. The next morning dawned cold and clear. Ingvild stood before Jarl Håkon and what seemed like the entire population of Ravenfjord, ready to face the trials of Odin. Håkon's voice rang out across the gathering. "The trials of Odin are three: strength, wisdom, and courage. Pass them, and you will have earned your place among us. Fail, and you leave these shores never to return. Are you ready, Ingvild of Ravenholm?" Ingvild nodded, her jaw set with determination. "I am ready, my lord." "Then let the first trial begin," Håkon declared. Two burly warriors dragged forward a massive boulder, easily twice Ingvild's size. "The trial of strength," Håkon explained. "Move this stone from here to the marker by the fjord's edge. You have until the sun reaches its zenith." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Many seemed to think the task impossible. Ingvild approached the boulder, running her hands over its rough surface. She could feel the eyes of the entire town upon her, judging, waiting for her to fail. Taking a deep breath, Ingvild planted her feet and gripped the boulder. With a roar that echoed across the fjord, she lifted. Muscles strained, veins stood out on her neck. But slowly, inexorably, the massive stone left the ground. Step by agonizing step, Ingvild made her way toward the marker. The crowd's murmurs turned to shouts of encouragement. Even Håkon leaned forward in his seat, eyes wide with disbelief. With a final, titanic effort, Ingvild dropped the boulder onto the marker. The ground shook with the impact, and for a moment all was silent. Then a cheer erupted from the assembled crowd. Håkon stood, a genuine smile on his face. "Impressive Ingvild of Ravenholm, you have passed the trial of strength. But do not celebrate yet. Wisdom and courage still await, and they may prove even more challenging." As Ingvild caught her breath, she saw Astrid watching her from the edge of the crowd. The seeress nodded once, a gesture of approval or warning, Ingvild couldn't tell. One trial down, but the day was far from over. Ingvild steeled herself for what was to come, knowing that each challenge would bring her closer to finding her place in this new world, or send her back into exile, this time with no home to return to. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and Ingvild prepared herself for the trial of wisdom, wondering what riddles or tests of knowledge Jarl Håkon would set before her. Whatever came, she was determined to prove that she was more than just brute strength, that the blood of giants flowing through her veins carried with it the wisdom of ages. The great hall of Jarl Håkon buzzed with excitement. Ingvild, having passed the trials of Odin, now stood proudly among the Jarl's inner circle. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of acceptance and new responsibilities, but a sense of unease still lingered in the air. Håkon sat at the head of the long table, his face grave as he addressed his advisors. The reports cannot be ignored any longer. 3 coastal villages razed in as many weeks. Survivors speak of a monster from the depths. Murmurs rippled through the gathered warriors. Ingvild exchanged a glance with Bjorn, who had become something of a mentor to her since her arrival. What manner of beast could cause such destruction? Ingvild asked, her voice carrying across the hall. All eyes turned to her, some still wary of the giant-blooded newcomer. Håkon stroked his beard thoughtfully before responding. The descriptions vary, but all agree on one thing. It's a serpent of monstrous size. Some say it's as long as 10 longships, with scales that shrug off sword and axe alike. A chill ran down Ingvild's spine. She thought of the stories her mother used to tell, of great beasts that lurked in the depths of the fjords. Astrid the seeress spoke up from her place in the shadows. This is no ordinary creature. The signs are clear. Jörmungandr stirs. A hush fell over the hall. Even hardened warriors paled at the mention of the Midgard serpent, the great beast said to encircle the world. Hakon's fist came down on the table with a resounding thud. Myth or not, this threat must be dealt with. I will lead an expedition to hunt this serpent. Who among you will join me? Warriors clamored to volunteer, each eager to prove their worth against such a formidable foe. Ingvild stood, her voice ringing out above the din. I will go, my Jarl. My strength may prove useful against such a beast. Hakon nodded approvingly. Good. Ingvild, Bjorn, and Astrid will accompany me. We sail with the morning tide. As the hall emptied, Astrid approached Ingvild, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Be wary, giant's daughter. The seas hold secrets older than the gods themselves. Your blood may be both blessing and curse in the days to come. Before Ingvild could ask for clarification, the seeress melted back into the shadows, leaving her with a sense of foreboding. Dawn broke cold and gray over Ravnfjord. Mist clung to the water as Ingvild helped load supplies onto Hakon's personal longship, the Sea Wolf. The vessel was a masterpiece of Norse shipbuilding, its dragon-headed prow snarling defiance at the choppy waves. As they pushed off from the dock, Ingvild felt the eyes of the entire town upon them. Wives, children, and elders lined the shore, their faces a mix of pride and fear. She caught sight of a group of children, wide-eyed with awe, pointing at her towering form. They'll be telling tales of this voyage for generations, Bjorn said, coming to stand beside her at the rail. Let's make sure they're tales of victory, eh? Ingvild managed to smile, but her heart was heavy with the weight of expectation. For 3 days, they sailed along the rugged Norwegian coastline, stopping at each ravaged village to gather information. The destruction was horrific. Entire buildings reduced to splinters, boats crushed like toys, and always the haunted eyes of the survivors. On the 4th day, as they rounded a rocky headland, a cry went up from the lookout. Movement in the water! Port side! All eyes turned to the churning seas. At first, Ingvild saw nothing but the play of waves against the rocks, then a flash of something massive and sinuous beneath the surface. Hakon's voice rang out, sharp with command. Battle stations! Ready the harpoons! Warriors scrambled to their positions, weapons at the ready. Ingvild gripped the rail, her knuckles white as she scanned the waters. Suddenly, the sea before them exploded. A creature beyond imagination burst from the depths, water cascading from scales the size of shield bosses. Its serpentine body seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky, blotting out the sun. Jörmungandr, the Midgard serpent, had awakened. For a moment all was silent save for the crash of waves and the creaking of the ship's timbers. Then chaos erupted. Harpoons! Loose! Hakon bellowed. A volley of iron-tipped spears arced through the air, most glancing harmlessly off the serpent's armored hide. One found purchase, sinking deep into a spot just behind its massive head. The beast's roar of pain shook the very air. It thrashed wildly, sending waves that threatened to capsize the sea wolf. Hold fast! Ingvild shouted, bracing herself against the mast. She watched in horror as 2 warriors were swept overboard by the deluge. As Jörmungandr's head swung toward the ship, its eyes locked with Ingvild's. In that moment, she felt a connection, a resonance that vibrated through her very being. The world around her seemed to fade away. Jotun child, a voice reverberated in her mind, ancient and terrible. Why do you sail with these mortals? Your blood sings of frost and mountain, not salt and wave. Ingvild's mouth went dry. She was dimly aware of the battle raging around her, of Bjorn shouting her name, but it all seemed distant, unimportant. What are you? She managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper. The serpent's massive eye blinked slowly. I am the end and the beginning, the coil that binds the world, and you, little giant, have a part to play in what is to come. Before Ingvild could respond, reality came crashing back. The serpent's tail smashed into the side of the ship, sending her sprawling across the deck. Ingvild! Bjorn was at her side in an instant, hauling her to her feet. By the gods, woman, now is not the time for a nap. She shook her head, trying to clear it. Bjorn, I heard it. In my mind. It spoke to me. Bjorn's eyes widened, but before he could respond, Håkon's voice cut through the chaos. The harpoon line. It's pulling us under. Indeed, the sea wolf was listing dangerously, drawn inexorably toward the thrashing serpent. Ingvild knew in that moment that they were outmatched. This was no beast to be hunted, but a force of nature unleashed. Making a split-second decision, she charged toward the harpoon line. With strength born of desperation and her giant's blood, she grasped the thick rope and pulled. Muscles straining, teeth gritted, Ingvild heaved with all her might. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like a mountain splitting, the harpoon tore free from Jörmungandr's flesh. The serpent reared back, its roar now one of surprise rather than pain. It regarded Ingvild once more, something like respect in its ancient eyes. Until we meet again, Jotun child. The voice echoed in her mind. Then, with a motion that seemed to bend the very fabric of reality, Jörmungandr dove beneath the waves and vanished. The sudden silence was deafening. The crew of the Sea Wolf stood in stunned disbelief, many making signs against evil. Håkon approached Ingvild, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. What happened? What did you do? Ingvild, still breathing heavily from her exertion, met the Jarl's gaze. I'm not entirely sure, my lord, but I think this is only the beginning of something much larger than any of us. As the battered ship limped back toward Ravnfjord, Ingvild stood at the prow, her mind reeling. The encounter with Jörmungandr had awakened something within her, a connection to her giant heritage that both thrilled and terrified her. She knew that her path had irrevocably changed. The world was larger and more dangerous than she had ever imagined, and somehow she was meant to play a crucial role in events to come. As the familiar coastline came into view, Ingvild steeled herself for the challenges ahead. Whatever destiny awaited her, she would face it with the strength of giants and the heart of a Viking. The return to Ravnfjord was met with a mixture of relief and trepidation. News of the encounter with Jörmungandr spread quickly, and Ingvild found herself the subject of even more intense scrutiny than before. Whispers followed her through the streets, some of awe, others of fear. A week after their return, Jarl Håkon summoned Ingvild to his private chambers. She found him poring over ancient maps and scrolls, his brow furrowed in concentration. Ah, Ingvild, he said, looking up as she entered. What do you make of this? He gestured to a weathered piece of parchment covered in intricate runes. Ingvild leaned in, her eyes widening as she recognized some of the symbols. This speaks of Yggdrasil, the world tree. But I've never seen these particular runes before. Håkon nodded, a glimmer of approval in his eyes. They're ancient, predating even our oldest skalds. They speak of a sacred grove, a place where the roots of Yggdrasil touch our world. And you believe such a place exists? Ingvild asked, her voice hushed with wonder. I do, Håkon replied, his gaze intense. And I believe you're meant to find it. Your connection to Jörmungandr, your giant's blood. These are no mere coincidences. The old ways are stirring, Ingvild, and you stand at the center of it all. Before Ingvild could respond, the door burst open. Astrid strode in, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. The signs are clear, she announced, her voice resonating with power. The grove reveals itself. We must go now, before the way is closed once more. Håkon sprang into action, barking orders to prepare for immediate departure. Within hours, a small group consisting of Håkon, Ingvild, Astrid, Bjorn, and a handful of trusted warriors were aboard the Sea Wolf, sailing north along the coast. As they journeyed, Astrid explained more about the sacred grove. It's said to be a nexus point, where the energies of the 9 worlds converge. If we can reach it, we may find answers about Jörmungandr's awakening and your role in what's to come, Ingvild. The voyage was fraught with danger. Storms battered the ship, and more than once they had to fend off attacks from rival clans who viewed their expedition as a threat. Through it all, Ingvild felt a growing sense of anticipation, as if every league brought her closer to some fundamental truth about herself. On the 5th day, they reached a mist-shrouded fjord, unlike any Ingvild had ever seen. The cliffs on either side were covered in ancient, gnarled trees that seemed to whisper as they passed. "We're here," Astrid breathed, her eyes fixed on the shoreline. As they made landfall, Ingvild felt a change in the air. It was as if the very ground thrummed with hidden power. They made their way inland, following Astrid's unerring guidance, until they reached a clearing that took Ingvild's breath away. At the center stood an enormous ash tree, its trunk wider than 10 men could encircle. Its branches seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky, disappearing into the mists above. At its base, massive roots breached the earth, creating natural archways and alcoves. "Yggdrasil," Håkon whispered, awe evident in his voice. Astrid stepped forward, raising her arms. "Great Yggdrasil, world tree, axis of all creation, we come seeking wisdom and guidance. Reveal to us the truths hidden in your roots." For a moment nothing happened. Then, the air began to shimmer. Ingvild gasped as ghostly figures appeared around them. Giants, gods, and creatures of legend, all going about their business, as if the mortals weren't even there. "The 9 worlds," Bjorn breathed, his eyes wide with wonder. "We're seeing them all at once." Ingvild's attention was drawn to a particular scene. A group of frost giants gathered in council, their voices a low rumble that she could feel in her bones. To her shock, she recognized features similar to her own among them. "Your ancestors," Astrid said softly, coming to stand beside her. "The Jötnar blood runs strong in you, Ingvild. It's time you embrace that part of yourself." Before Ingvild could respond, a new figure appeared before them. Tall and one-eyed, clad in a traveler's cloak, he radiated an aura of ancient power. "Odin," Håkon gasped, dropping to one knee. The others quickly followed suit, but Ingvild found herself rooted to the spot, unable to look away from the Allfather's penetrating gaze. "Rise," Odin's voice echoed through the grove, though his lips didn't move. "You have come seeking answers, but are you prepared for the weight of knowledge?" Ingvild stepped forward, her heart pounding. "I am, Allfather. What is happening? Why has Jörmungandr awakened?" Odin's eye seemed to bore into her very soul. "The cycles of the world turn, young giant. Ragnarok approaches, but not as the skalds have sung. The old prophecies have shifted, and you, Ingvild of 2 bloods, stand at a crossroads of fate." Images flashed through Ingvild's mind. Armies clashing beneath a blood-red sky, Jörmungandr rising from the seas, the branches of Yggdrasil aflame. "You have a choice to make," Odin continued. "Embrace your giant's heritage fully, and you may yet prevent the destruction of all worlds. But the path will not be easy, and you will be tested in ways you cannot imagine." Ingvild's mind reeled. "But how? I don't even know what it means to be a giant." A hint of a smile played at Odin's lips. "That, young one, is why you are here. Reach out to the roots of Yggdrasil. Let the wisdom of your ancestors flow through you." With trembling hands, Ingvild approached one of the massive roots. As her fingers made contact, a jolt of energy surged through her. Suddenly, she was no longer in the grove, but experiencing countless lifetimes in the span of heartbeats. She saw the creation of the worlds, the wars between gods and giants, the forging of great weapons and the weaving of powerful magics. More importantly, She felt the strength and wisdom of her Jotnar forebears, their connection to the primal forces of ice and stone. When the visions faded, Ingvild found herself on her knees, gasping for breath. The others watched her with a mixture of concern and awe. "What did you see?" Bjorn asked, helping her to her feet. Ingvild stood, and the others gasped. Her skin had taken on a faint bluish tint, and intricate patterns like frost on a window pane swirled across her arms. "Everything," she whispered, flexing her fingers as if seeing them for the first time. "I understand now. The Jotnar, the gods, the coming war, it's all connected." Odin nodded approvingly. "You have taken the first step on a long and perilous journey, Ingvild, Giant's daughter. But know this, the fate of all worlds now rests in your hands." With those ominous words, the visions faded. The group found themselves once more in the misty grove, the ghostly figures gone, but the air still thrummed with power, and Ingvild could feel the change within herself. A newfound connection to her giant heritage that both exhilarated and terrified her. As they made their way back to the ship, each lost in their own thoughts, Ingvild knew that nothing would ever be the same. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but she was no longer the uncertain girl who had left Ravenholm. She was Ingvild of two bloods, with the strength of giants and the heart of a Viking, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The fate of the 9 worlds hung in the balance, and Ingvild was determined to rise to the occasion, no matter the cost. The journey back to Ravenfjord was tense with anticipation. Ingvild spent much of her time on deck, testing her newfound abilities. Ice crystals formed at her fingertips, and she found she could sense the ebb and flow of natural forces around her. As they approached the familiar shores, Bjorn approached her, his face etched with concern. "You've changed, Ingvild. Are you still one of us?" Ingvild met his gaze steadily. "I'm still me, Bjorn. Just more. And I think I know what we need to do next." Upon their return, Ingvild stood before Jarl Håkon and his council, her voice ringing with newfound authority. "We must journey to Jotunheim. The frost giants hold a key to binding Jormungandr and preventing Ragnarok." Murmurs of disbelief and fear rippled through the gathered warriors. Håkon leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. "Jotunheim? The realm of giants? It's suicide." Ingvild stood her ground. "It's necessary. I can guide us there safely, but we must go soon. The barriers between worlds are weakening." After hours of heated debate, a small expedition was organized. Ingvild would lead, accompanied by Bjorn, Astrid, and a handful of the bravest warriors. As they prepared to depart, Håkon pulled Ingvild aside. "I'm trusting you with the lives of my best people," he said, his voice low. "Don't make me regret this decision." Ingvild nodded solemnly. "I won't let you down, my Jarl. We'll return with the means to save our world." The journey to Jotunheim was unlike anything they had experienced before. Ingvild led them through hidden paths between worlds, crossing icy wastes and treacherous mountain passes. The very air seemed to resist their presence, biting at exposed skin with unnatural cold. On the 3rd day, they crested a ridge to find a sight that took their breath away. Before them stood an enormous fortress carved from a single glacier, its spires reaching impossibly high into the steel-gray sky. "By Odin's beard," Bjorn whispered, his breath frosting in the air. "It's magnificent." Ingvild felt a pull in her blood, a sense of homecoming mixed with trepidation. This is it, the heart of Jotunheim. As they approached the massive ice gates, a booming voice echoed across the landscape. "Who dares approach the halls of Thrym, king of the frost giants?" Ingvild stepped forward, drawing herself up to her full height. "I am Ingvild, daughter of your kin and of Midgard. We seek audience with your king." For a long moment there was silence. Then, with a grinding of ice against ice, the gates began to open. A group of frost giants emerged, each standing twice as tall as Ingvild. Their leader, a scarred warrior with eyes like chips of blue ice, regarded them warily. "You claim kinship, Yet you bring humans to our door, he growled. Explain yourself, half-blood. Ingvild met his gaze unflinchingly. The fate of all worlds hangs in the balance. Jörmungandr stirs, and Ragnarok approaches. We need the wisdom and power of the Jötnar to prevent the destruction of everything. The giant's eyes narrowed. Pretty words. But why should we care about the fate of humans or gods? Because, Ingvild countered, if the world tree burns, Jotunheim burns with it. We're all in this together, whether we like it or not. A tense silence followed. Finally, the giant leader nodded. You may enter, but be warned, one false move, and your bones will join the foundations of our fortress. As they were led through winding corridors of translucent ice, Bjorn sidled up to Ingvild. Well done, he murmured. But how do you plan to convince their king? Ingvild's jaw tightened. By any means necessary. The throne room of Thrym was a vast cavern, its ceiling lost in shadows high above. Intricate ice sculptures lined the walls, depicting scenes of battle and ancient Jötnar lore. On a throne of pure, blue-white ice sat Thrym himself, a giant of such immense size that even his own kind seemed small before him. So, Thrym's voice rumbled like an avalanche, a half-breed comes to us in our time of isolation. Speak quickly, little one. Why should I not crush you and your companions where you stand? Ingvild stepped forward, forcing down her fear. Great Thrym, king of frost and mountain, I come seeking your aid. Jörmungandr has awakened, and with it the threat of Ragnarok looms. But the old prophecies have changed. There's a chance to prevent the destruction of all worlds, including Jotunheim. Thrym leaned forward, interest glinting in his icy eyes. And what makes you think we care about the fate of other realms? Because, Ingvild countered, the Jötnar are part of the great cycle. If Yggdrasil falls, we all fall with it. But together we have the power to change fate itself. A low murmur ran through the assembled giants. Thrym stroked his beard of icicles thoughtfully. Pretty words, half-blood. But words alone will not sway me. If you truly share our blood, prove your worth in the ancient way. Face me in single combat. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Bjorn grabbed Ingvild's arm. You can't be serious. He'll kill you. Ingvild shook him off, her eyes never leaving Thrym's. I accept your challenge, King Thrym. Name your terms. The giant king's laughter shook icicles from the ceiling. Brave little one. Very well. If you can land a single blow that moves me from this throne, I will hear your plea and consider your request. But if you fail, you and your companions will serve as thralls in my halls for 1,000 years. Ingvild nodded grimly. Agreed. As a space was cleared in the center of the throne room, Astrid approached Ingvild, her eyes wide with concern. Are you certain about this? Even with your newfound powers, he's still a full-blooded giant king. Ingvild managed a small smile. I have to try. For all our sakes. The battle that followed was like nothing the Midgard-born warriors had ever seen. Thrym's massive fists crashed down like avalanches, each blow powerful enough to shatter stone. But Ingvild was quicker, her smaller size allowing her to dodge and weave. As the fight wore on, Ingvild felt her giant's blood singing in her veins. Ice formed around her fists, and the very air seemed to respond to her will. She landed blow after blow, but Thrym remained unmoved, his laughter echoing through the chamber. Is this all you have, little half-blood? He taunted. Perhaps I overestimated your worth. Ingvild, battered and breathing hard, knew she had to change tactics. Closing her eyes, she reached deep within herself, calling upon the ancient knowledge she had gained from Yggdrasil. Suddenly, the temperature in the room plummeted. Frost giants accustomed to bitter cold felt a chill that went beyond the physical. Ingvild's eyes snapped open, glowing with an inner fire. With a roar that shook the very foundations of the ice fortress, Ingvild charged. Her fist, now encased in ice harder than steel, connected with Thrym's jaw. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, inexorably, the giant king toppled backward, his throne shattering as he fell. Silence descended upon the chamber. Thrym rose, rubbing his jaw, a look of astonishment on his face. Then, to everyone's surprise, he began to laugh. "Well struck, Ingvild of Two Bloods," he boomed. "You have earned the right to be heard. Speak, and we shall listen." As Ingvild began to explain her plan, she caught Bjorn's eye. The Viking warrior nodded, a mix of pride and newfound respect in his gaze. Ingvild allowed herself a small smile. They had passed the first great test, but she knew that even greater challenges lay ahead. The fate of the 9 worlds hung in the balance, and the alliance forged this day between Midgard and Jotunheim would be crucial in the battles to come. The longship cut through the choppy waters of the North Sea, its dragon-headed prow slicing through the mist. Ingvild stood at the bow, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the shores of Britain waited. The weight of her newfound alliance with the frost giants of Jotunheim hung heavy on her shoulders, as did the knowledge imparted by King Thrym. "The weapon you seek," he had told her, "lies hidden in the lands of the Saxons, a relic of the old world, capable of binding even Jörmungandr itself." Now, weeks later, they approached the foreign coast, tension thick in the air. Jarl Håkon stood beside Ingvild, his face grim. "We're entering dangerous waters," he muttered. "The Saxons have grown wary of Norse raids. We'll need to move quickly and decisively." Ingvild nodded, her hand unconsciously tracing the intricate frost patterns that now permanently adorned her skin. "We're not here for gold or glory, Håkon. We have a higher purpose." "Tell that to the men," Bjorn interjected, joining them at the bow. "They're restless. A little raiding might keep their spirits up." Ingvild frowned, but before she could respond, a shout came from the lookout. "Land ho, and smoke on the horizon!" All eyes turned to the approaching shoreline. Sure enough, a plume of dark smoke rose from what appeared to be a coastal settlement. "A monastery," Håkon mused, a predatory glint in his eye. "Rich pickings, and they might have the knowledge we seek." Ingvild felt a knot form in her stomach. This was not what she had envisioned when they set out on this quest, but she knew the men needed something tangible to fight for, beyond her visions and prophecies. "Very well," she conceded, "but we focus on finding information about the weapon. No unnecessary bloodshed." As they beached their ship and the warriors prepared for battle, Ingvild closed her eyes, reaching out with her newfound senses. The air here felt different, charged with a power she couldn't quite identify. The attack on the monastery was swift and brutal. Norse warriors poured over the low stone walls, their war cries shattering the morning calm. Monks scattered in terror, some trying in vain to protect their precious manuscripts and relics. Ingvild moved through the chaos like a force of nature. Where her frost-covered fist struck, stone crumbled and wood splintered. She tried to focus on their true purpose, scanning the buildings for any sign of ancient writings or artifacts. As she entered the main chapel, a voice called out in panic-stricken Latin. An elderly monk cowered behind the altar, clutching a weathered tome to his chest. "Please," he begged in broken Norse, "spare this knowledge. It is sacred." Ingvild approached slowly, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I mean you no harm, holy man. That book, what does it contain?" The monk's eyes widened as he took in Ingvild's otherworldly appearance. You are touched by the old powers. The book speaks of them, of giants and great serpents and the binding of worlds." Heart racing, Ingvild reached for the tome. Suddenly, a war cry split the air. Bjorn charged into the chapel, his axe raised high. "Ingvild, behind you!" She spun to see a young Saxon warrior emerging from a hidden alcove, a crude spear aimed at her back. Without thinking, Ingvild's giant blood took over. She lashed out with a fist wreathed in frost, catching the attacker square in the chest. The force of the blow sent him flying across the chapel, his body crashing through a beautifully painted window before disappearing from view. In the sudden silence that followed, Ingvild stared at her hand in horror. The monk gaped at her, terror and awe warring on his face. What are you?" he whispered. Before Ingvild could respond, Haakon's voice boomed from outside. To the ships, Saxon reinforcements approach. Snatching the book from the monk's unresisting hands, Ingvild turned to Bjorn. We need to go. Now. As they raced back to the longship, the weight of what she'd done settled over Ingvild like a shroud. She had taken a life, not in the heat of a fair battle, but with powers that no mortal could hope to match. The line between protector and monster suddenly felt very thin. Once safely at sea, Ingvild sequestered herself in the ship's hold, poring over the captured tome by lamplight. The Latin was difficult, but with her enhanced abilities she found she could decipher more than she expected. Hours later, she emerged onto the deck, her face pale and drawn. Haakon and Bjorn rushed to meet her. "Well?" Haakon demanded. "What did you find?" Ingvild took a deep breath. "The weapon we seek, it's not just a thing. It's a place, a nexus point where the energies of Midgard and Jotunheim intersect. And," she hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper, "it's tied to my bloodline." Bjorn's brow furrowed. "What do you mean, tied to your bloodline?" "The book speaks of an ancient Jotun who fell in love with a mortal woman," Ingvild explained. "Their union produced a line of half-giants, tasked with guarding the nexus point. I think I'm the last of that line." A heavy silence fell over the ship. Finally, Haakon spoke, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. "Where is this nexus point?" Ingvild pointed to a spot on the horizon. "An island, not far from here. The locals call it Lindisfarne." As if in response to her words, a bolt of lightning split the sky, followed by a rumble of thunder that seemed to shake the very bones of the earth. "Odin's Eye," Bjorn breathed. "What have we gotten ourselves into?" Ingvild stood at the rail, her eyes fixed on the approaching storm. She could feel the power building, not just in the air around them, but in her very blood. Whatever awaited them on Lindisfarne, she knew it would change everything. "We've woken something," she murmured. "Something old and powerful, and I fear it may be hungry." As the ship plowed on through increasingly turbulent waters, the crew cast nervous glances at Ingvild. Her skin seemed to glow faintly in the gathering gloom, frost patterns swirling and shifting of their own accord. Haakon approached her, his face a mask of concern and determination. "Whatever comes, Ingvild, know that we stand with you. Giant's blood or no, you're one of us now." Ingvild managed a small smile, grateful for the Jarl's support. But as another peal of thunder shook the ship, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were sailing into the jaws of destiny itself. The island of Lindisfarne loomed before them, shrouded in mist and crackling with otherworldly energy. Whatever secrets it held about Ingvild's heritage and the weapon to bind Jörmungandr, one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same after this night. With a deep breath, Ingvild steeled herself for what was to come. Giant and human, protector and warrior, she would face her destiny head-on. The fate of the 9 worlds hung in the balance, and she was the fulcrum upon which it all turned. "Ready the landing party," she called out, her voice carrying over the howling wind. "We end this tonight." As the warriors prepared for battle, Ingvild closed her eyes, reaching out with her senses to the power that pulsed from the heart of Lindisfarne. Whatever awaited them on that mist-shrouded shore, she would meet it with all the strength of her mixed heritage, the cunning of the Norse and the primal power of the Jotnar. The stage was set for a confrontation that would echo through the ages, where the lines between myth and reality would blur, and the fate of all worlds would hang in the balance. The longship's keel grated against the pebbled shore of Lindisfarne, the sound eerily muffled by the thick fog that enveloped the island. Ingvild was the first to leap onto the beach, her feet sinking slightly into the wet sand. The air crackled with an energy she could feel in her bones, setting her giant's blood aflame. "Be on your guard," she warned the others as they disembarked. "This place, it's not natural." Bjorn grunted in agreement, his hand never leaving the haft of his axe. "Aye, it feels like the very air is watching us." As the raiding party assembled on the beach, a figure emerged from the mist. Astrid, the seeress, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light, approached Ingvild. "The threads of fate converge here," Astrid intoned, her voice resonating strangely. "What we do this night will echo through eternity." Håkon joined them, his face grim. "Then let's not waste time. Where do we go, Ingvild?" Ingvild closed her eyes, reaching out with her senses. The power pulsed strongest from the center of the island, where the silhouette of a stone church loomed against the gray sky. "There," she pointed. "Whatever we're looking for, it's in that church." The group moved inland, tension mounting with each step. The island seemed deserted, but Ingvild couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched by unseen eyes. As they approached the church, a blood-curdling screech split the air. From the mist emerged a group of twisted creatures, part man, part beast, with elongated limbs and razor-sharp claws. "Draugr," Bjorn shouted, raising his shield. "The undead walk here." The battle erupted in an instant. Viking warriors clashed with the monstrous Draugr, steel ringing against claw and bone. Ingvild found herself at the heart of the melee, her frost-covered fists shattering undead flesh with each blow. But for every Draugr they felled, 2 more seemed to take its place. The raiding party was slowly being pushed back, surrounded by a sea of gnashing teeth and grasping claws. "We need to reach the church," Ingvild shouted over the din of battle. "Whatever's causing this, it's in there." Håkon nodded grimly. "We'll clear a path. Ingvild, take Astrid and go." With a mighty war cry, Håkon and Bjorn led a charge, carving a bloody swath through the Draugr horde. Ingvild grabbed Astrid's hand and sprinted for the church doors, ice forming beneath her feet to propel them forward. They burst through the heavy wooden doors, slamming them shut behind them. The sounds of battle outside became muffled, replaced by an eerie stillness within the stone walls. "By the gods," Ingvild breathed, taking in the scene before them. The church's interior had been transformed. Runes of power covered every surface, glowing with a sickly green light. At the center of the nave, a swirling vortex of energy pulsed suspended in midair, and there, standing before the vortex with arms outstretched, was a figure Ingvild recognized from her visions, the Saxon warrior she had struck down during the monastery raid. "You!" she gasped. "But how?" The man turned, his eyes glowing with the same eerie light as the runes. When he spoke, his voice echoed with power. "So the last of the giant kin has come. How fitting that you should witness the unraveling of all worlds." Astrid stepped forward, her own eyes blazing. "You fool. You meddle with forces beyond your comprehension. Close this portal before it's too late." The man laughed, a sound that sent chills down Ingvild's spine. "Too late? It's already done. The barriers between worlds grow thin. Soon Jörmungandr will pass through, and Ragnarök will begin anew." As if in response to his words, the vortex pulsed violently. Through its swirling depths, Ingvild caught a glimpse of something massive and serpentine moving in another realm. "We have to close it," she said, turning to Astrid. "How do we stop this?" The seeress's face was grave. "The nexus point is tied to your bloodline, Ingvild. Only you can seal it. But the price, it may be more than you're willing to pay." Before Ingvild could ask what she meant, the Saxon sorcerer attacked. Bolts of eldritch energy shot from his fingertips, forcing Ingvild and Astrid to dive for cover. "You cannot stop what has been set in motion," he crowed. "The old world will fall and a new age of chaos will begin." Ingvild rolled to her feet, frost gathering around her fists. "Not if I have anything to say about it." She charged, dodging blasts of energy as she closed the distance. The sorcerer's eyes widened in surprise as Ingvild's ice-encased fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling. But even as he fell, the vortex grew larger. The church walls began to crack, reality itself seeming to warp around them. "Ingvild," Astrid shouted, "the nexus point. You must seal it now." Ingvild turned to the swirling vortex, feeling its pull on her very soul. How? Tell me what to do. Astrid's voice was heavy with sorrow. Your blood, Ingvild. The blood of giants and humans combined. It's the key to sealing the rift. But it will require all of it. The implication hit Ingvild like a physical blow. You mean... Yes, Astrid nodded. To close the portal, you must sacrifice yourself. Time seemed to stand still as Ingvild grappled with the weight of this revelation. All her life she had felt out of place, torn between two worlds. Now, it seemed, she finally understood her purpose. No. The shout came from the doorway. Bjorn stood there, bloodied but unbowed, having fought his way through the Draugr horde. There must be another way. Ingvild met his gaze, a sad smile on her face. There isn't, old friend. This is why I was born, why I'm here. The vortex pulsed again, more violently this time. Through its depths, Ingvild could see the massive coils of Jörmungandr drawing ever closer. There's no time, Astrid urged. Ingvild, you must decide now. With a deep breath, Ingvild stepped toward the vortex. Frost spread from her feet, creeping up the walls and across the floor. She turned to Bjorn one last time. Tell Håkon. Tell everyone. I'm sorry. And thank you. For everything. Before Bjorn could respond, Ingvild plunged her hand into the vortex. Pain unlike anything she had ever experienced coursed through her body. She felt her life force, her very essence, being drawn into the swirling maelstrom. As her vision began to fade, Ingvild saw flashes of other worlds, Asgard, Jotunheim, realms beyond imagining. And through it all, she felt a sense of purpose, of rightness. With her last ounce of strength, Ingvild pulled, drawing the vortex into herself. The runes on the walls flared brilliantly, then went dark. The air itself seemed to shudder, and then silence. Bjorn rushed forward, catching Ingvild as she collapsed. Her skin was cold to the touch, the frost patterns fading like morning dew. Ingvild, no, please, stay with us. Astrid knelt beside them, her eyes brimming with tears. She's done it. The rift is sealed. Jörmungandr is bound once more. As Bjorn cradled Ingvild's lifeless body, a soft glow began to emanate from her chest. Before their astonished eyes, tendrils of light spread outward, enveloping Ingvild in a cocoon of radiance. What's happening? Bjorn gasped. Astrid's eyes widened in wonder. The old powers move in mysterious ways. Perhaps this is not the end, but a new beginning. As the light intensified, blinding in its brilliance, Bjorn and Astrid shielded their eyes. When it finally faded, they looked down to find Ingvild's body gone, leaving behind only a small, intricately carved runestone. Astrid picked it up reverently. Her sacrifice has changed the very fabric of reality. The saga of Ingvild Giant's daughter is far from over. Outside, the mist began to clear, revealing a world forever changed by the events of this night. The battle against Ragnarok had been won, but at a terrible cost. And somewhere, in the spaces between worlds, a new legend was just beginning to unfold. The great hall of Valhalla shimmered with an otherworldly light, its golden walls stretching endlessly upward. Ingvild stood at its center, her form translucent and shimmering, caught between worlds. The last thing she remembered was plunging into the vortex on Lindisfarne, sacrificing herself to seal the rift. Am I dead? She wondered aloud, her voice echoing strangely in the vast space. Not quite, Ingvild Giant's daughter, came a resonant voice from behind her. She turned to find herself face to face with Odin himself, the All-Father of Norse mythology. His one eye gleamed with ancient wisdom, and two ravens perched on his shoulders, watching her intently. Your sacrifice was noble, Odin continued, but your task is far from complete. The threads of fate have been rewoven, and you stand at their center. Ingvild's mind reeled. But I sealed the rift. Jörmungandr was bound. Isn't it over? Odin's laugh was like distant thunder. Over? My dear, it has only just begun. Your actions have set in motion events that will reshape the 9 worlds. But first, you must prove yourself worthy of the power that now flows through you. With a wave of his hand, the golden hall dissolved, replaced by a barren, rocky landscape. Ingvild found herself fully corporeal once more, the chill wind biting at her skin. 3 trials await you, Odin's voice echoed around her. Pass them, and you will take your place as a protector of the realms. Fail, and all will be lost. Before Ingvild could respond, the ground beneath her feet began to tremble. From the earth erupted a monstrous creature, part wolf, part dragon, its eyes blazing with hunger. The first trial, Odin intoned, strength of body. Ingvild barely had time to dodge as the beast lunged, its razor-sharp claws raking the air where she had stood. She rolled to her feet, calling upon her giant's blood. Frost spread from her hands, forming a gleaming ice axe. The battle that followed was fierce and primal. Ingvild's enhanced strength and speed were matched by the creature's savage ferocity. They clashed again and again, neither gaining the upper hand. As the fight wore on, Ingvild realized that brute force alone would not win the day. She thought back to her training with Bjorn, to the lessons of strategy and cunning he had imparted. With a daring move, she allowed the beast to pin her to the ground. As its jaws descended for the killing blow, Ingvild thrust her ice axe upward, catching the creature in its soft palate. With a howl of pain, it reared back, giving her the opening she needed. A final mighty swing of her axe, and the beast fell, dissolving into mist. Panting heavily, Ingvild turned to find Odin watching her, a glimmer of approval in his eye. Well fought, he nodded. But strength of body is only the beginning. Now, we test the strength of your mind. The landscape shifted once more. Ingvild found herself standing before an ancient ash tree, its branches stretching out to touch 9 different worlds. At its base sat 3 Norns, female beings who ruled the destiny of gods and men. Choose, they spoke in unison, their voices like the rustling of leaves. One world must fall so that others may flourish. Which will you sacrifice? Ingvild's heart raced. How could she possibly make such a choice? Each world was home to countless lives, each with its own hopes and dreams. She closed her eyes, reaching out with her senses as Astrid had taught her. She could feel the pulse of life in each realm, the intricate web of connections between them. No, she said finally, opening her eyes to meet the Norn's gaze. I reject this choice. The 9 worlds are interconnected. To sacrifice one would unbalance them all. There must be another way. For a long moment, silence reigned. Then, slowly, the Norns began to smile. Wisdom, they nodded. To see beyond the obvious, to seek a path where none seems to exist. You have passed the second trial. Relief flooded through Ingvild, but it was short-lived. The world around her began to blur and shift once more. The final trial, Odin's voice boomed. The hardest of all. For now, Ingvild, Giant's daughter, you must face yourself. The swirling mists coalesced into a familiar scene. The village of Ravenholm, where Ingvild had grown up. But something was wrong. The villagers moved about their daily lives, but their eyes were cold, filled with fear and hatred as they looked upon her. A figure approached, Ingvild's own mother, Sigrid, but her face was twisted with disgust. Monster, she spat. You're no daughter of mine. Look at what you've become. Ingvild recoiled as if struck. Mother, no. I'm still me. I'm still your daughter. But Sigrid turned away, joining the other villagers who had begun to gather, their faces a sea of revulsion and fear. Abomination! Frost giants get! You don't belong here. Their words cut deeper than any blade. Ingvild felt her resolve wavering, doubt creeping in like a poison. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was a monster, neither human nor giant, belonging nowhere. As despair threatened to overwhelm her, a memory surfaced, Bjorn's voice gruff but kind. You're one of us now, giant's blood and all. Ingvild took a deep breath, straightening to her full height. The frost patterns on her skin glowed with inner light as she addressed the crowd. "I am Ingvild," she declared, her voice ringing with newfound confidence. "Daughter of Ravenholm and of Jotunheim. I am neither monster nor savior, but simply myself, and I choose to embrace all that I am." As the words left her lips, the illusion shattered. The hateful villagers dissolved into mist, leaving Ingvild once more in Odin's presence. "Well done." The All-Father nodded, genuine respect in his voice. "You have faced your deepest fears and emerged stronger. The trials are complete." With a wave of his hand, Odin summoned a shimmering portal. Through it, Ingvild could see glimpses of the 9 worlds, each facing its own challenges and dangers. "The barriers between realms grow thin," Odin explained. "Jormungandr is bound for now, but other threats loom. The 9 worlds need a protector, one who understands both the ways of giants and the hearts of humans." He fixed Ingvild with his penetrating gaze. "Are you ready to take up this mantle? To stand as guardian of the realms, wielding the power of your mixed heritage?" Ingvild looked through the portal, thinking of all she had experienced, the battles fought, the sacrifices made, the lessons learned. She thought of Bjorn, Astrid, and all those who had believed in her. With a deep breath, she stepped toward the portal. "I am ready," she said, her voice steady and sure. Odin nodded, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. "Then go, Ingvild, Giant's daughter. Your true journey begins now." As Ingvild stepped through the portal, she felt power surge through her veins, not just the strength of giants, but something more. The wisdom of Yggdrasil, the cunning of Odin, the foresight of the Norns, all flowed into her, reshaping her very being. She emerged onto Midgard, the world of humans, but she could sense the other realms pulsing around her. The 9 worlds stretched out before her, each with its own wonders and perils. Ingvild took a deep breath of the crisp morning air, feeling truly alive for the first time. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever threats emerged from the shadows, she would face them. For she was Ingvild, daughter of 2 worlds, protector of 9, and her saga was only just beginning. The air crackled with tension as Ingvild materialized on the shores of Midgard. The familiar coastline of Norway stretched before her, but everything felt different now. Her senses, heightened by Odin's gifts, could perceive the thin veils between realms, the ebb and flow of energies that connected the 9 worlds. She had barely taken a step when a familiar voice called out, "Ingvild, by Thor's hammer, is that really you?" Turning, she saw Bjorn rushing towards her, his face a mixture of disbelief and joy. Behind him, a group of warriors from Ravnfjord followed, led by Jarl Hakon himself. "Bjorn!" Ingvild exclaimed, embracing her old friend. "How long has it been since Lindisfarne?" Bjorn's expression grew somber. "3 moons have passed, Ingvild. We thought you lost to us forever." Hakon approached, his eyes narrowing as he took in Ingvild's transformed appearance. Her skin now shimmered with an otherworldly light, and runes of power seemed to dance across her flesh. "What manner of being are you now?" the Jarl asked, his hand resting warily on his sword hilt. Ingvild met his gaze steadily. "I am still Ingvild, Jarl Hakon, but I have been changed. Odin himself has tasked me with protecting the 9 worlds from the chaos that threatens to engulf them." Before Hakon could respond, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. In the distance, a terrible roar split the air, sending birds scattering from the trees in panic. "What in hell's name was that?" one of the warriors gasped. Ingvild's face grew grim. "Jormungandr, the binding I placed on the world serpent at Lindisfarne is weakening. We don't have much time." As if to confirm her words, the sky darkened ominously. Storm clouds gathered with unnatural speed, and flashes of lightning illuminated shapes that seemed to writhe between the worlds. "Tell me what we must do," Hakon said, all suspicion gone from his voice. replaced by grim determination. Ingvild closed her eyes, reaching out with her newfound senses. The weapon Thrym spoke of. It's not just an object. It's a place. A nexus point where the energies of all 9 worlds converge. We must reach it before Jormungandr breaks free. And where is this nexus point? Bjorn asked. Ingvild pointed to a mist-shrouded mountain in the distance. There, at the peak of Ymir's throne. The journey to the mountain was fraught with peril. As they climbed, reality itself seemed to warp around them. Visions of other realms bled through, the icy wastes of Niflheim, the fiery pits of Muspelheim, the golden halls of Asgard. More than once they were beset by creatures from beyond. Frost giants, fire demons, and things that defied description. Ingvild stood at the forefront, her powers manifesting in ways that left even her companions in awe. Ice and lightning danced at her command, and the very earth seemed to respond to her will. As they neared the summit, a bone-chilling screech rent the air. Looking up, they saw a massive shape silhouetted against the roiling clouds, Jormungandr, straining against the last threads of its binding. "We're out of time," Ingvild shouted over the howling wind. "The serpent is breaking free." They crested the final ridge to find a sight that took their breath away. At the mountain's peak stood an ancient stone circle, each monolith carved with runes that pulsed with power. At the center, a swirling vortex of energy connected all 9 worlds. But they were not alone. A figure stood before the vortex, arms raised in triumph. As they approached, Ingvild recognized him with a shock. It was the Saxon sorcerer from Lindisfarne, somehow alive and imbued with terrible power. "Ah, the giant kin returns," he sneered, his voice echoing unnaturally. "You're too late. The old order falls and chaos will reign supreme." With a gesture, he sent a wave of dark energy towards them. Ingvild stepped forward, raising a barrier of ice and light that barely held against the onslaught. "Keep him occupied," she shouted to Håkon and the others. "I need to reach the nexus point." As her companions engaged the sorcerer in battle, Ingvild fought her way towards the center of the stone circle. Each step was a struggle against forces that threatened to tear her apart. Finally, she reached the vortex. Up close, she could see glimpses of all 9 worlds swirling within its depths, and there at its heart she saw the truth. A single thread, unraveling, that connected all of reality. Ingvild knew what she had to do. Reaching deep within herself, she called upon every ounce of power granted to her by Odin and her mixed heritage. Frost giants and Aesir, humans and Vanir, the blood of all flowed through her veins. As she plunged her hands into the vortex, pain beyond imagining coursed through her body. She could feel the fabric of reality itself flowing through her, threatening to tear her apart. "Ingvild, no." Bjorn's anguished cry reached her ears. "You'll destroy yourself." Through gritted teeth, Ingvild managed to speak. "It's the only way, Bjorn. The 9 worlds must be bound, or all is lost." With a supreme effort of will, Ingvild began to weave, not with thread and needle, but with the very essence of creation itself. She drew upon every lesson, every experience, every drop of knowledge granted to her by Odin's trials. As she worked, visions flashed before her eyes. The past, present, and countless possible futures. She saw the 9 worlds in all their glory and all their peril. And through it all, she wove, binding the realms together in a new pattern stronger than before. The sorcerer, sensing what she was doing, broke away from the battle with a howl of rage. "No, you cannot undo what has been set in motion." He hurled a bolt of pure chaos energy at Ingvild. But before it could strike, a massive form interposed itself between them. Jormungandr, the world serpent, had arrived. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, the great beast's eye met Ingvild's. In that gaze, she saw eons of wisdom, of patient waiting, of a role misunderstood by mortals and gods alike. With a nod of understanding, Ingvild completed her weaving. The vortex pulsed once, twice, and then collapsed in on itself. A shockwave of power radiated outward, knocking everyone to the ground. When the dust settled, Ingvild stood at the center of the stone circle, her form shimmering with otherworldly light. The sorcerer was gone, banished to a realm beyond reach, and coiled protectively around the entire mountain was Jormungandr, no longer a harbinger of destruction, but a guardian of the new order. Bjorn approached cautiously, awe in his eyes. Ingvild, what happened? She turned to him, a smile of profound peace on her face. It's done, Bjorn. The 9 worlds are bound anew, stronger than ever before. And Jormungandr, she glanced at the massive serpent, has chosen a new role. Protector, rather than destroyer. As the group made their way down the mountain, the sky cleared. The air felt different, charged with possibility rather than dread. Ingvild knew that her journey was far from over. As guardian of the 9 worlds, there would always be new challenges, new threats to face. But for now, as she walked beside her friends, both old and new, Ingvild felt a sense of purpose and belonging she had never known before. Giant and human, protector and warrior, she had finally found her place in the vast tapestry of existence. And somewhere, in the halls of Valhalla, Odin smiled, knowing that the 9 worlds were in capable hands. I've achieved more than I ever dreamed possible, and yet you feel the weight of it all. Bjorn finished for her. Aye, that's the curse of greatness, or so the skalds say. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the aurora dance across the night sky, brighter and more vibrant than ever before, a visible sign of the newly strengthened connections between worlds. Suddenly, the air before them shimmered. A portal opened, and through it stepped a figure Ingvild had last seen in the halls of Valhalla, Odin himself. Bjorn dropped to one knee, but Ingvild remained standing, meeting the Allfather's gaze steadily. You have done well, Ingvild, Giant's daughter, Odin said, his voice like distant thunder. The 9 worlds sing with the harmony of your weaving. Thank you, Allfather, Ingvild replied, but I sense you're not here merely to offer congratulations. A hint of a smile played at Odin's lips. Perceptive as always. You are correct. Your task is not yet complete. He waved his hand, and the air between them shimmered, showing visions of the other realms. Ingvild saw the icy wastes of Niflheim, the fiery depths of Muspelheim, the golden fields of Vanaheim. The barriers between worlds have been strengthened, Odin explained, but they are not impenetrable. There are those who would seek to undo your work, to return chaos to the 9 worlds. Ingvild's jaw set with determination. What must I do? You must establish a new order, Odin said. A way for the realms to coexist in harmony while maintaining their separate identities. It is a task that will require diplomacy as much as strength. As the weight of this new responsibility settled on her shoulders, Ingvild felt a moment of doubt. Am I truly ready for this, Allfather? Odin's single eye seemed to peer into her very soul. You have the blood of giants and the heart of a human. You have walked between worlds and woven them anew. There is no one better suited to this task. With those words, Odin vanished, leaving Ingvild and Bjorn alone once more. Well, Bjorn said after a moment, it seems our adventures are far from over. Ingvild nodded, her mind already racing with plans. We'll need to gather allies from all the realms. Humans, giants, elves, dwarves, even the gods themselves. It won't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is, Bjorn grinned, clapping her on the shoulder. But you won't face it alone. Where you go, I go. As they made their way back to the great hall, Ingvild's steps felt lighter. She knew the path ahead would be challenging, but with friends like Bjorn at her side, she felt ready to face whatever came. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. Ingvild traveled between the realms, negotiating treaties, settling disputes, and slowly building a network of allies across the 9 worlds. In Jotunheim, She stood before the frost giant King Thrym once more, this time as an equal rather than a supplicant. "You have proven yourself worthy, Ingvild of Two Bloods," Thrym rumbled. "The giants will stand with you in this new age." In Svartalfheim, she brokered a peace between warring factions of dwarves, earning their loyalty and their unparalleled craftsmanship. Even in Asgard itself, she walked among the gods, her unique heritage allowing her to bridge the gap between divine and mortal. But it was on Midgard, in the world of humans, that Ingvild faced her greatest challenge. Many still feared her power, seeing her as a threat rather than a protector. At a great thing of chieftains and jarls, voices were raised in anger and fear. "How can we trust one who is not fully human?" one jarl shouted. "Her loyalty will always be divided." Ingvild stood, her presence silencing the crowd. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of all she had experienced. "I stand before you as a daughter of two worlds, and a protector of nine," she began. "My blood may be mixed, but my heart beats for the good of all realms. I have seen the wonders and the horrors that exist beyond Midgard, and I tell you this, we are stronger together than we could ever be apart." She went on to describe her vision for the future, a world where trade and knowledge flowed freely between realms, where the strengths of each race could complement the others. "We stand at the dawn of a new age," she concluded. "Will you join me in building a future brighter than any of us could imagine alone?" For a moment, silence reigned. Then, slowly at first but building to a crescendo, cheers and shouts of agreement filled the air. As the gathering dispersed, plans already being made for this new era of cooperation, Bjorn approached Ingvild. "Fine words," he said with a grin. "But words are easy. The real work begins now." Ingvild nodded, her eyes bright with determination. "Indeed it does. But for the first time I truly believe we can succeed." As they stood on the cliffs overlooking the fjord once more, Ingvild felt a sense of peace settle over her. The aurora danced overhead, brighter than ever, a visible reminder of the connections she had forged between worlds. She thought of how far she had come, from an outcast in a small village to a protector of all realms. The path had been hard, filled with sacrifice and pain, but also with friendship, growth, and wonder. "What now?" Bjorn asked, gazing out at the horizon. Ingvild smiled, feeling the pulse of the nine worlds flowing through her veins. "Now, my friend, we build. We learn. We grow. The saga of the nine worlds is just beginning, and we have the honor of writing its next chapter." As if in response to her words, a distant roar echoed across the fjord. Jörmungandr, once a harbinger of destruction, now a guardian of the new order. Ingvild raised her horn in a toast. "To the future," she said. "May it be as bright as the fires of creation, and as enduring as the roots of Yggdrasil itself." And as Bjorn echoed her toast, Ingvild knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them. For she was Ingvild Giant's daughter, weaver of worlds and bridge between realms, and her greatest adventure was only just beginning.